Every life has weather. Some mornings, the heart is clear and warm, and everything feels workable. Other mornings, a heaviness arrives from nowhere, and the same life feels like a burden. Tonight we explore one of the oldest teachings in Buddhism, that these moods are passing weather, and that there is a place in you the weather cannot touch. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Across the next hours, we will walk through the storms one by one. Craving, anger, restlessness, doubt. The Buddha and the old masters did not treat these as enemies. They studied them, welcomed them, and discovered something surprising hidden inside each one. Seen clearly, these storms became the very path toward greater peace and freedom. There is nothing to fix tonight and nothing to achieve. Simply listen and let the old stories do their work. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. The Buddha once offered a simple picture of the human heart. Just as many winds blow through the sky, he said, winds from the east and winds from the west, cold winds and warm winds, fierce winds and mild ones, so do many feelings move through this body and mind. Pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and feelings that are neither. They come, they pass through, and others follow. He did not say the winds were a problem. He simply described them as what they are. Winds, arising and passing, the natural movement of the sky. This is where our journey begins tonight, because once it is seen, it changes everything. Every day, life comes to us through the senses. We see things, hear things, taste and touch and smell things, and we think and feel things too. Thoughts and feelings arrive the same way sounds do, coming and going on their own. But something stands between us and all of it, our mood. Whatever mood is present works like a colored glass held over the whole day. Through a warm mood, the same house, the same work, the same face across the table feels like a blessing. Through a dark one, it all feels heavy. Nothing outside changed. You can notice this right now. There are sounds around you. There is the weight of your body in the bed or the chair. There are thoughts drifting by. And toward each of these comes a small reaction. A little liking or disliking that you never chose. Those small reactions, repeated all day long, become the mood. And the mood, more than anything that actually happens, decides how the day feels. The first teaching of the night is simple to say and deep to live. What happens to us is one thing. What receives it is another. And it is the receiving that decides how much we suffer. There is an old tale about this, from a small mountain province in the east. An aged lord ruled there, a careful man, respected and a little tired. One night he dreamed a strange dream. He stood in his own great hall, and one by one, every lamp went out. The first flickered and died near the door. Then the next and the next, each flame sinking into darkness, until he stood alone in a black and silent hall. He woke before dawn feeling deeply unsettled, and lay in the dark a long while. By morning he had summoned a dream reader, a serious man known through the province for his learning. The Lord described the dream, the hall, the lamps, the darkness. The dream reader listened, lowered his eyes, and was silent for a long moment. "My lord," he said at last, "the meaning is plain. The lamps are the joys of your house. One by one, they will be taken from you. All that brightens your life will go out until you stand alone." The Lord said nothing. He dismissed the man with a small movement of his hand, and a heaviness settled over the palace like a fog. Servants spoke in whispers. The Lord ate little. He walked the corridors at night and looked at the lamps burning in their stands, and each one seemed to him already half gone. For days the whole household lived inside that dream, and worry sat at every table. Then an advisor, an old woman who had served 3 generations of the family, spoke carefully to her lord. "There is another dream reader," she said, "in the valley below. She is known for seeing truly. Perhaps hear the dream once more from her mouth." The second dream reader was brought up the mountain. She was younger than the first, plain in her dress, unhurried in her manner. The Lord told her the same dream in the same words. The hall, the lamps, the darkness at the end. She thought for a while, then looked up at him, and there was warmth in her face. "My Lord," she said, "this is a fortunate dream. Every lamp in your hall went out before yours. That means you will be granted long life. You will remain burning after every other light has gone to its rest. Yours will be the flame that stays, growing steadier as the years pass, until it has ripened into wisdom." The Lord sat back. Something in his chest loosened. Within a day the palace had changed. The whispering stopped, the meals grew lively, and the lamps in the corridors looked like company again, rather than omens. But the Lord was a thoughtful man, and one evening he called the old advisor to him. "Both readers heard the same dream," he said. "The same hall, the same lamps, the same darkness. One telling filled this house with grief. The other filled it with warmth. How can a single dream carry 2 such different houses?" The old woman bowed. "The dream never changed, my Lord. Only the heart it was poured into." The dream never changed. Only the heart it was poured into. And the same thing happens to so many of us, constantly and mostly unseen. Someone in love can have their cart scraped in the market and wave it off with a smile. The same person, on a heavy morning a month later, is wounded by a slow shopkeeper or a look that lasted a moment too long. Small, ordinary events in both cases. What changed was the mood that received them. Anyone who has reread an upsetting message the next morning and wondered what all the alarm was about has seen this with their own eyes. The Buddhist tradition looks at this without blame. Moods are not character. They are conditions arising from causes, many of them far outside our control. A poor night's rest, an old memory stirred, the season turning. These things gather like clouds gather, and then there is weather. Nobody stands in a rainstorm and takes the rain personally. Yet when sadness or irritation moves through the heart, we take it very personally. We think it is us. We think it is true. And that is the mood's greatest trick. They present themselves as reality. When fear is present, the world looks dangerous. When resentment is present, the people around us look unreasonable. It is like a program on the radio that keeps being interrupted by advertisements, until slowly the advertisements begin to feel like the show. The mood interrupts our life so confidently that we mistake it for our life. Someone once asked the Indian sage Ramakrishna why the world contains so much trouble, and he answered, "To thicken the plot." There is a smile in that answer, and also a deep acceptance. The weather is part of the story. It was never a mistake that clouds cross the sky, and every cloud crosses. That is the second thing to see. Try to remember a single mood that stayed. The deepest grief lifted, at least for an hour. The brightest joy softened into something ordinary. The angers of years ago are hard even to remember now, and old worries have dissolved so completely that only the fact of them remains. Feelings behave like weather because they are built like weather, out of conditions, and conditions never hold still. The Buddha placed this near the center of everything he taught. Whatever has the nature to arise, has the nature to pass. He meant kingdoms and bodies and mountains, and he also meant Tuesday afternoon's bad mood. Whatever is moving through you tonight, pleasant or heavy, it is already on its way somewhere else. Now, someone might quietly wonder, if I were wiser, if I practiced more, surely the weather would stop. It is a natural hope, and the tradition answers it with a story about the Buddha himself, drawn from some of the oldest records of his life. In those records, there is a figure called Mara. He is the face the tradition gave to everything that clouds the heart: temptation, fear, doubt, discouragement. Before the Buddha's awakening, Mara came at him with everything he had and failed. And here is the part that surprises people. Mara did not stop coming. For the rest of the Buddha's long life, the old scriptures say, Mara kept visiting, again and again, in one disguise after another. Once, the Buddha was speaking to villagers about the end of suffering, and a farmer came walking up the road, broad-shouldered and sunburned, carrying a great plough. "Have you seen my oxen?" he asked. "They have wandered off in the night, and a man cannot live without his oxen." "No oxen have passed this way," the Buddha said. The farmer stepped closer, and something sharper came into his eye. "Then you understand my trouble. A man must have oxen. He must have fields and seed and stores for the winter, and he must worry over every one of them. That is a man's life. What can a wanderer with an empty bowl know about suffering?" "I have no oxen," the Buddha said, "no fields and no stores. Nothing of mine can wander off in the night. You are speaking to a man with nothing to lose, and so with nothing to fear losing." The farmer stood very still. The Buddha looked at him calmly, past the sunburn and the plough, and said, "I know you, Mara." At those words, the farmer's disguise simply failed. There was nothing left for him to do. The scriptures say he vanished on the spot, muttering that the Blessed One had seen him. Another time, deep in the night, a whisper came to the Buddha as he sat alone beneath the trees. It was the voice of doubt, soft and reasonable. "You are wasting your years. No one will understand this teaching. Look how few they are and how tired you are." The Buddha did not argue with the voice. He did not drive it away. He simply said, once more, "I know you, Mara." And once more, there was nothing for the visitor to hold on to. One of the old texts closes this long campaign with an unforgettable picture. After every disguise had failed, Mara sat down on the ground a little way off from the Buddha, silent, shoulders fallen, head down, drawing idle lines in the dirt with a reed. A storm with nowhere left to land. Storms visited the most awakened being our tradition knows, all his life. That changes the meaning of our own storms. If the weather still came for the Buddha, then the weather coming for you is not a verdict on your heart. It is not evidence that you have failed or that something in you is broken. It is evidence that you are alive, with a mind, in a world of conditions. And the Buddha met each visit the same way. He did not fight the visitor. He did not build a wall or flee into the forest. He recognized it. "I know you, Mara." 4 words, and the whole visit lost its power. Recognition turns out to be a kind of freedom all by itself. The moment a mood is seen as a mood, as weather in costume, it can no longer pretend to be the truth about your life. Recognition works in an ordinary week exactly as it worked under the trees. A person wakes with a heaviness on an ordinary weekday, and, before their feet touch the floor, the mood has written a whole story. The work is pointless, the relationships are strained, the years are slipping. By breakfast, the story feels like plain fact. But it is the same hall and the same lamps as yesterday, when everything felt workable. Something arrived in the night, that is all. Met with a simple inward greeting, "I know you," it becomes weather again, and weather passes. It came in through the sixth sense door, and it will leave through it too. There is real relief in this, and even a kind of tenderness. The mother short-tempered at the end of a long day, the man lying awake at 3 in the morning convinced of his failures. Neither of them chose the clouds that rolled in. Seeing this in ourselves, we begin to see it in each other, and blame softens on both sides. The deepest promise here is one this whole night will keep returning to. You have weather, and you are also the sky it moves through. The sky is never harmed by its storms. It does not cling to its clear days or resent its grey ones. Something in you is like that. Behind every mood you have ever had, there was an awareness knowing the mood, untouched, spacious, still here now. The Zen tradition calls this our original nature. The weather has never once damaged it. There is a difference then between having weather and being weather, and most of a lifetime's unnecessary suffering lives in that small gap. When anger is simply present and known, it is an energy passing through a large space. When we collapse into it and become it, the space disappears, and there is only anger wearing our name, making our decisions, speaking with our mouth. The mood is identical in both cases. What differs is where we stand. The whole art that the coming hours will slowly unfold is really the art of standing in the sky rather than in the storm, and it begins tonight with nothing more strenuous than seeing that a sky is there. Perhaps, in the coming days, this can live in your life in the smallest possible form. When a mood arrives, and one always will, there might be a moment of simply naming the weather. Heaviness this morning. Some irritation moving through this afternoon. Nothing needs to be done about it, and no one needs to be blamed for it, least of all yourself. Naming the sky's condition is enough. Some people find it changes the whole flavor of a difficult hour. This small act of seeing the cloud as a cloud. The cloud usually finishes its crossing sooner when nobody is wrestling with it. And on the good days, the clear mornings when the heart is light for no reason, the same seeing applies. That is weather too, passing and lovely, to be enjoyed without being gripped. Let us rest here a little while, with the winds moving through the wide sky and nothing needing to change. When you feel ready, we will continue on together. A Chan master of old China left behind a teaching that has been passed from hand to hand for centuries. Sit in unmoving suchness, he said, and if desire and fear arise, remember they are not who you are. Hold to nothing. Let these states come and let them go, and you will find what is true. Let them come and let them go. It sounds easy, spoken in a warm room at night. But when a strong feeling actually arrives, Almost all of us do one of two things instead, and we have been doing them so long that they feel like the only choices there are. The first thing we do is push the feeling down. We clamp the lid on the anger, swallow the grief, smile over the resentment, and get on with the day. It looks like strength, and sometimes it is even praised as strength. The second thing we do is the opposite. We let the feeling take the wheel. The sharp word flies out, the door slams, the message is sent at midnight, and afterward we stand in the wreckage, wondering who exactly did all that. Pressing down and pouring out. The lid and the flood. Whole lives swing between these two, and both of them, in their own way, exhaust us. The old Chan instruction points somewhere else entirely, at a third possibility that most of us were never shown. One of the oldest stories in the East, told for thousands of years, shows why the first way, the lid, was never going to work. It is the story of a father, a son, and a flood. Long ago, in an old kingdom, the rains would not stop. The rivers rose past their banks and kept rising. Water spread over the farmlands until the fields were silver from one horizon to the other, and the people gathered what they could carry and moved to the hills, watching their villages turn to islands below them. The ruler of that land called for the most capable man in the kingdom, a master builder, broad-handed and tireless, and gave him one task: stop the water. The builder looked at the flood and saw an enemy. So he did what one does with an enemy. He built walls. He raised earthen dams across the valleys, higher than any that had been raised before. He set thousands of hands to work hauling stone and packing earth, and when a dam was finished, the people on the hills would cheer, because behind it the land drained, and for a season the fields returned. But water is patient. It rose behind each dam, month by month, and probed every seam. In the second year, a wall in the north gave way in a single night, and the water it had been holding poured through with all its stored strength, reaching farther than the original flood ever had. The builder rebuilt it thicker. He built new walls beside old walls, and each time, sooner or later, came the same ending. Somewhere, in the dark, held water finding its opening. He fought that flood for 9 years. The old accounts say his hair went grey at the water's edge. He grew bent from the work, and something in his face grew hard, because a man cannot lose to the same opponent for 9 years and stay soft. In the end, worn through, he laid the task down, and it passed to his son. The son was different. Before he moved a single stone, he went and stood at the edge of the water, and he stayed there a long time, watching. Then he did something no one expected. He began to walk. For whole seasons he traveled the flooded country, from the mountains where the rivers were born down to the distant sea. He climbed ridges to study how the valleys lay. He sat with old farmers and asked where the water used to run in their grandfather's time, and where it gathered now, and where it seemed to want to go. The old workers from his father's walls shook their heads at all this walking. "The water rises while you wander," one of them told him. The son answered from the water's edge, and his words are the heart of the story. "My father fought this water as an enemy," he said. "But the water was never an enemy. It is a guest with nowhere to go. We will not build walls against it. We will open a road for it." And that is what they did. Instead of raising barriers, they dug channels. They deepened the old riverbeds and cut passages through the low hills, joining valley to valley, always sloping toward the sea. It was slow, humble work, years of it, without a single dramatic wall to cheer for. But the water offered a road, took it. Little by little, the flood drew down along the new channels. The rivers found their courses and kept to them. The fields drained and dried, the people came down from the hills, and where there had been silver water to the horizon, there were green crops moving in the wind. The sun became honored above anyone in that kingdom's memory, and what was honored was not force. It was understanding. He had listened to the water until he knew what it needed, and then he had given it a way through. Every strong feeling you have ever pushed down has behaved exactly like that flood. This is the teaching the story has carried for so many centuries. A feeling is energy, and energy that is walled in does not disappear. It rises behind the wall. It probes the seams, and it comes out somewhere, in its own time and its own place, usually a place we would never have chosen. The swallowed anger at work surfaces at the family table as a sharpness nobody understands. Grief that was never allowed its tears turns up years later as a tiredness that sleep cannot touch, or as a bitterness toward people who did nothing wrong. The body keeps what the heart refuses, and the body's patience, like waters, eventually ends. Buddhist teachers have said this plainly for a very long time. What we suppress does not leave us. It goes underground and travels. Yet the answer cannot be the flood itself either. A person who releases every surge the moment it rises leaves a trail of broken things behind them, damaged trust, frightened children, burned years. Acting on each impulse feels like freedom for exactly as long as the impulse lasts. Afterward, it looks like what it is, a life run by its weather. Look closely, and the two failures turn out to be the same mistake wearing different clothes. Both of them believe the weather completely. The one who suppresses believes the feeling is so dangerous, so shameful, so final, that it must never be allowed to exist in the open. The one who erupts believes the feeling is so true, so justified, so urgent, that it must be obeyed this instant. Total fear of the mood, or total faith in it. Neither one ever actually meets the mood, stays with it, learns what it is made of. And so the same storms return year after year, strangers still, because they have never once been received. There is something tender in seeing this, because nobody chose their pattern. The clampers were usually taught young that certain feelings were unwelcome in their house, and they learned to build walls before they learned to write. The flooders often grew up where no one modeled the pause, where every feeling in the household went straight to the mouth. We inherited our floods and our walls alike, which makes the third way genuinely new ground for almost everyone who finds it, at any age. So the lid fails and the flood fails, and here is the third possibility the Chan master was pointing to. There is a place to stand where the feeling is fully allowed, fully felt, and given a channel rather than a wall. The feeling is permitted to move through awareness the whole length of its course, known and named and accompanied, without being obeyed. The poet T.S. Eliot found words for this place that many Buddhist teachers have gladly borrowed. He called it the still point of the turning world. Everything moves around it. It does not move. Do not mistake this stillness for passivity or for going cold. The still point is closer to the sun standing at the water's edge, completely engaged, watching, listening, learning what this energy is and where it needs to go. It takes far more presence than the lid ever did, and far more courage than the flood. And out of it comes something the other two ways can never give, a response chosen in freedom. The anger fully felt at the still point may still become a firm word, a boundary, a change. But it will be spoken by you, and it will land clean. What does a person look like who has found this place? Let us explore a story about that, one that turns on two paintings. An aging abbot had guided his mountain monastery for 40 years, and he wished to leave one thing behind him. He announced that a great scroll would be commissioned for the meditation hall, a painting of perfect peace, so that monks not yet born could look up from their cushions and remember what they were practicing for. Word went out, and painters from many provinces sent their work up the mountain through an entire autumn. The abbot spent long evenings with the scrolls, unrolling them one by one across the floor of his room by lamplight. In the end, 2 remained. The first was by a young painter from the coast, a woman whose brush was already famous. Her scroll showed a mountain lake at dawn, utterly still, holding the peaks upside down in its surface like a second world. Mist stood in the valleys. Not one leaf stirred. The monks who carried it into the hall found themselves lowering their voices around it. The second scroll was by an old painter no one knew well, a man from a far northern village. When it was unrolled, the senior monks glanced at one another. It showed a storm. A grey sky split by rain, wind bending the pines sideways, and down the center of the painting a waterfall in full thunder, throwing white spray off black rocks. It looked like the opposite of everything the abbot had asked for. On the day of choosing, both scrolls hung in the hall, and the community gathered. The abbot stood before the still lake for a long time, and those watching felt sure. Then he moved to the storm and stood longer. Finally, he raised his hand and touched the second scroll, low down, near the base of the waterfall. "Come and see," he said. One by one the monks came close, and one by one they found it. There, behind the falling water, a small bush grew from a crack in the wet rock, and in the fork of its branches a bird had built her nest. She sat upon it with her wings settled and her eyes calm, the thunder of the falls a hand's width away, her whole small body at rest. "This one," the abbot said. "The lake is lovely, but the world is rarely a still lake. Peace that needs silence around it is a guest that leaves when trouble arrives. Look at her instead. The storm is real, the noise is real, and she is at rest inside it. That is the peace we practice for. Hang this where every monk will see it." And so the storm hung in the meditation hall, and for generations afterward, monks in difficulty would look up from their cushions and find the small bird behind the waterfall, and remember. The bird in that painting is the still point made visible, real conditions roaring on every side, and a center at rest that denies none of it. Something else grows at the still point, and it may be the best of all its gifts. Kindness becomes possible there. When a person is neither walling their feelings out nor being carried off by them, a space opens in which other people can actually be seen. The friend's sharp remark turns out to have exhaustion behind it. The child's defiance turns out to be fear in costume. From inside our own storm, none of this is visible. The storm fills the whole window. From the still point, the window clears, and what looks back at us from the world is mostly other people's weather, deserving the same patience we are learning to give our own. This is why the tradition never separates stillness from compassion. They are one discovery. The steadiest people you have known were almost certainly the warmest, and that was no coincidence. Life offers small chances to practice this every single day, and they are humbler than any story. The moment between hearing a cutting remark and answering it. The breath before opening a difficult letter. The pause with the hand already on the door. In each of these there is a tiny still point available, a heartbeat of space where the feeling is felt in full and nothing has been done yet. Most arguments that scar a family, most words people carry regret for across decades, would have dissolved inside 3 unforced breaths taken at that point. The channel only needs to be a few seconds long for the water to begin finding its way. And the breath itself, it turns out, has been demonstrating the whole teaching all along. Each breath rises and is not clung to. Each breath empties and is not resisted. Expansion and release, over and over, thousands of times a day, a middle way running through the center of the body since the hour of birth. Nothing about the breath suppresses, and nothing about it spills over. When teachers from the Buddha onward told their students to return to the breath, this is part of what they were returning them to. Perhaps in the coming days, when some feeling rises with force, there can be a moment of remembering the flooded kingdom. The feeling is a guest with nowhere to go. It does not need a wall, and it does not need the keys to the house. It needs a road, and awareness itself is the road. Simply staying present while the energy moves, for even a little while, is the channel being dug. Some people find it helps to feel the feet on the floor while it happens, or the weight of the body in the chair, the still point discovered not in the mind, but in the simple ground of sitting here. Nothing has to come of it. The water knows the way to the sea. And on the days when the still point cannot be found at all, when the wall goes up or the flood gets loose despite everything, that too can be met without harshness. The son of the flooded kingdom needed years to learn the land. Every builder of channels begins beside a mess of water and begins anyway, and the beginning counts. Let this be a resting place on our path tonight. Settle into the ground beneath you, easy and unhurried, and when it feels right, we will walk on to what waits inside the clouds themselves. In the Dhammapada, the oldest collection of the Buddha's sayings, there is a verse about a flower. As upon a heap of rubbish thrown by the roadside, it says, "A lotus may grow, sweet-smelling and delightful." The lotus was the Buddha's favorite image for the awakened heart, and he chose its home deliberately. The lotus does not grow in clean water. It roots in mud, in the dark and heavy bottom of the pond, and everything radiant about it is drawn up from that darkness. Take away the mud, and there is no flower. Tonight, so far, we have seen the moods as weather, and we have found the still point where the storms can be met. Now comes the teaching that changes the whole relationship, the one this entire night rests upon. It says something almost scandalous. The difficult states themselves are the mud the lotus needs. Every one of them is carrying something. We normally treat our hard feelings, the craving, the anger, the laziness, the fear, the pride, as flaws in the design, weeds to be pulled, evidence against ourselves. Whole lifetimes are spent at war with them, and the war never ends, because they keep growing back. The Buddha and the masters who followed him looked more closely and found a secret at the root of each one, something noble, hidden, and waiting inside every one of these states. A seed inside every cloud. If that is true, then nothing in you needs to be thrown away. One of the tradition's best-loved tales opens the door, a story about the least valuable object a person can hold. In old Japan there lived a young man who had nothing. He was honest and willing, but fortune had passed him by entirely. He worked other men's fields for scraps, slept where he was allowed to, and owned only the clothes he stood in. At last, with nowhere else to turn, he walked to a temple of Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, knelt on the worn boards, and prayed. "I do not ask for riches," he said. "Only show me a way to live." He stayed all night in prayer, and toward dawn, between sleeping and waking, an answer came to him. "Whatever your hand first touches when you leave this temple, hold it with care and go west." He rose at first light and walked out through the temple gate, and at the edge of the road he stumbled on a stone and fell. When he pushed himself up, his hand had closed around something. He opened his fingers and looked at it. A single piece of straw. He stood in the road, holding it. Around him, other travelers were setting out with their bundles and their purses, and he held one straw. A poorer answer to a prayer could hardly be imagined. But he remembered. Hold it with care. So he did not throw it down. He carried it west along the road, and as he walked, the wind moving through the straw made a small humming sound. So he bound it into a little whirling toy that sang and turned in the breeze at the end of its stalk. Before noon, he passed a merchant's household traveling the other way, and a small boy among them saw the singing straw and would not walk another step without it. The young man knelt and gave it to the child freely. The boy's grandmother, touched, insisted he take 3 oranges in return. He walked on, carrying 3 oranges, and the day grew hot. By the roadside he came upon a young woman who had traveled too far in the heat. She sat collapsed against a stone, her lips dry, her voice barely a whisper. "Water," she said. "Please." There was no water near, so he knelt and gave her the oranges, one by one, and their juice revived her. Color returned to her face. When her party caught up to her, they were so grateful to the stranger who had helped her that they pressed on him a bolt of fine woven cloth. He walked on, carrying the cloth. Toward evening, he met travelers standing in the road around a horse that had gone down. It was a fine animal, weakened past standing by the long journey, and its owner, needing to move on before dark, was in despair. The young man offered his bolt of cloth for the horse, and the trade was gladly made. Then he did what he knew how to do. He fetched water, gathered soft grass, and stayed by the animal through the night, keeping it warm, letting it rest. By morning the horse stood, shook itself, and was whole. Leading the horse west, he came at last to a great farmhouse where the household was loading carts. The master of the house was called away on a long journey, years perhaps, and had need of a strong horse, and looking at the young man, at the animal's fine condition, and the kindness in how it was handled, he made an offer. "Take the house and fields into your care while I am gone. If I do not return, they are yours." The young man kept those fields as faithfully as he had kept the straw. The land prospered under his hands. In time, the house and fields became his own, and he became known through that province as a man of wealth who had begun with a single piece of straw and who never turned a poor traveler from his gate because he remembered what it was to hold almost nothing. The straw never changed. It was worthless in the road, and it was worthless in his hand. What made everything happen was how it was held. He treated the most worthless thing in Japan as if it mattered, and honored like that, it unfolded, step by step, into a whole life. Now bring this back to the clouds, because the tale is really about them. The feelings we call worthless, the ones we are ashamed of and try to drop in the road, respond to being honored in exactly the same way. Take craving, the endless wanting that embarrasses us most. The sage Nisargadatta Maharaj, when a student confessed to being full of desire, gave an answer nobody expects. Desire is not the problem for you, he said. The problem is you don't desire enough. You only want small things. And he pushed further. Why not want everything? Complete fulfillment, unshakable peace, freedom itself. He had seen into the root of wanting. Underneath every small craving, for the purchase, for the praise, for the next pleasant thing, there is one vast longing trying to speak, the longing to be whole. The wanting is a kind of homesickness that has forgotten where home is, and so it goes searching in one small thing after another. Held with honor, craving points all the way back. Anger carries a seed too. Look beneath any anger you have ever felt, and you will find something it was guarding, a hurt, a fear, or a love of fairness that could not bear what it was seeing. The heat is often clumsy and causes harm, but the root is strength, the raw wish to protect and set right. Sleepiness, the heaviness that overtakes us, is at root a seeking of rest and peace in a world that has forgotten how to stop. Fear, when it is honest, fear of real danger, is a guardian. And the other fears, the ones that rise when life asks us to grow, are standing exactly at the border of who we have been, which means they mark the doorway to who we could be. Even pride, held to the light, reveals a true wish underneath the puffing, the wish to be someone of worth, to bring something good into the world. That wish deserves better than the small stage pride builds for it. The tradition's answer to pride is playful and enormous at the same time. If you must be something great, it says, why settle for being impressive at dinner parties? Be what you actually are. The Buddha taught that awakening itself is the nature of every being, waiting like the lotus in the mud. The wish to matter is pointing at that, and always was. It only aimed too low. Nothing in you, in other words, arrived without a purpose. Every cloud formed around a seed. And this is why the masters could meet their students' worst confessions with such ease. A student would arrive certain that his anger, or her endless wanting, disqualified them from the path, and the teacher would hear it all and nod, as if receiving good news. The raw material had arrived. A person with strong weather has strong energy, and energy is exactly what the path transforms. The old saying goes that the bigger the front, the bigger the back. There is another account of a hidden seed, a favorite among teachers of the old arts of Japan, about a boy everyone had already measured. In a temple town there lived a boy whose left arm had been weak since a childhood illness, thin and without strength, unable to grip or lift. In that town, boys trained in the yielding art, the discipline of balance, in which an opponent's force is received and guided rather than opposed, and the boy wanted this more than anything. The other students exchanged looks when he first knelt in the practice hall. Some were kind about it and some were less kind, and all of them were certain of the same thing. An old master taught at that hall, a man who had trained by the temple for 50 years. He watched the boy for a single morning and accepted him without a word about the arm. Then the strange instruction began. The master taught him one throw, one single movement, a turn of the hips, and a guiding of the opponent's own weight past its balance point, and nothing else. Week after week, the boy practiced this one throw, while the students around him learned dozens. Months passed. His feet learned the floor. The movement sank from his mind into his body. Finally, the boy's patience broke, and after practice one evening, he knelt before the old man. "Master," he said, "should I not be learning other techniques? The others learn something new each week. I have learned one thing since spring." The master looked at him for a while. "This is the only throw you know," he said. "It is also the only throw you will ever need. Trust me and polish it." The boy did not understand, but he trusted and he polished. When the autumn contest came, held in the temple courtyard, with the whole town watching from beneath the ginkgo trees, the master entered him, and murmurs ran through the crowd. His first opponent came at him with confident force, and the boy received it, turned, and guided the young man's own strength past its balance. The opponent found the ground almost softly, and the courtyard went silent. The second match ended the same way. In the final match, the boy faced the strongest student of the district, older and heavier, and for a long while the boy could only hold his ground. Then the older student grew impatient, pressed too hard, and gave his balance away, and the one throw, polished all those months, carried him to the earth. The town talked of nothing else for days. On the walk home in the dusk, the boy finally asked, "Master, how could I win with a single throw?" "For 2 reasons," the old man said. "First, you have come close to mastering one of the most difficult throws in the whole art. Almost no one polishes anything the way you have polished this. And second," and here the master smiled, "there is only one true defense against that throw. Your opponent must seize your left arm." The boy stopped walking. All those years, the arm he had hidden, the arm he had hated, the arm everyone had measured him by, it had been guarding him the whole time. What he carried as his deepest lack turned out to be the ground of his strength, though it needed 2 things to reveal itself: a teacher who did not flinch from it, and the long, patient work of honoring what he actually had. Neither wishing the arm different nor pretending it away had any part in the story. That is the difference, and it matters, between honoring a difficult thing and indulging it. Indulging anger means letting it burn whoever stands nearby. Honoring anger means turning toward it with respect and asking what it is protecting. Indulging craving means obeying every tap on the shoulder. Honoring craving means feeling the vast longing underneath and refusing to spend it on small things. The seed is reached by going toward the cloud with attention, never by being swept away in it, and never by pretending the cloud is not there. Modern life trains us hard in the opposite direction. We are taught to treat ourselves as improvement projects, our difficult states as defects to be edited out, our histories as damage. So a whole culture stands in the road, throwing down straw after straw. And the masters keep saying the same thing across the centuries: pick it up, hold it with care. The mud you are ashamed of is exactly what the lotus is asking for. People who practice this way do not become flat or grey, whatever we might fear. They become more alive, because nothing is being spent on the war anymore. The world comes through in more colors when no part of the heart is standing guard against itself. Think of how much attention the inner war consumes on an ordinary day: the monitoring, the criticizing, the pushing down and covering over, all of it running quietly underneath everything else like a machine left on in the basement. When that machine finally rests, the freed attention has to go somewhere, and it goes into living. Food tastes like itself again. Faces become interesting. The rain on the window at night becomes something heard rather than merely endured. This is what the masters mean when they insist the path leads toward life and never away from it. Perhaps something from this can travel into the ordinary days ahead. If some familiar difficult state comes visiting, the old irritation, the wanting, the heaviness, there might be one different moment in the middle of it, a moment of wondering rather than fighting. What is this one protecting? What is it seeking? No answer needs to come. The wondering itself is the honoring, the hand closing around the straw instead of dropping it. Whatever grows from that is allowed to take its own seasons, and seasons are patient things. Mud does its work in the dark, over months, asking for nothing except that nobody keep digging it up to check. Here, let us pause and breathe for a while, resting the way roots rest in dark soil. Whenever it suits you, the path continues, and we will follow the wanting mind to see where it truly leads. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha speaks of craving with striking directness. From craving arises sorrow, he says, and from craving arises fear. One who is wholly free of craving has no sorrow, and from where would fear come? He placed wanting at the very center of his teaching, right beside suffering itself, because he had watched the two travel together his entire life. Wherever one went, the other followed close behind. We ended our last stretch of the path by turning toward the wanting mind, and now we walk into its territory. Of all the weathers that cross the heart, this one is the most constant and the best disguised. Craving rarely announces itself as craving. It arrives sounding like the truth, and it always carries the same message. Happiness is somewhere else. Almost everyone knows the voice. If only the house were larger. If only the work were different. If only that person understood me. If only the body were younger. If only this season of life would hurry up and end. And on the small scale, running underneath every hour. If only there was something good to eat, something new to look at, something to check. Each promise says that after this one thing, the restlessness will finally lie down. And here is what the Buddha saw so clearly. The restlessness never lies down that way, because the wanting itself is the restlessness. Feeding it teaches it to knock again. There is a second cost, less obvious, and maybe deeper. Wanting blinds. An old Indian saying puts it perfectly. When a pickpocket meets a saint, he sees only the saint's pockets. Whatever we are craving becomes a lens over the whole world. The hungry person walks through a market of faces and sees only the food stalls. The lonely person hears every conversation as a door open or closed to them. Wanting narrows the wide world down to the one missing thing, and the rest of life, which is standing right there, goes unseen. A very old story from India shows where this leads, and it is told with great tenderness for its subject, because its subject is so many of us. It tells of a poor scholar who lived alone at the edge of a village. He was a learned man in a small way, but learning had brought him nothing, and he survived on what the villagers gave him. A handful of rice here, a cup of milk there. Many evenings he ate nothing at all. He was thin, and his one room was bare, and the nights were long. Then came a festival day, and the givers were generous. By sunset, the scholar found himself in possession of more grain than he had ever owned at once, a whole clay pot of it, full to the brim. He carried it home against his chest like a child. He set it down, then lifted it again, feeling its weight, Finally, he hung it from a beam above the foot of his sleeping mat, where he could see it, and lay down in the dark, with his hands behind his head, looking up at it. And the dream began while he was still awake, in the way such dreams do. There will be a lean year, he thought. There is always a lean year. And when it comes, grain will be precious, and a full pot of it will sell for silver. With that silver, I will buy a pair of goats. Goats need almost nothing, and they give kids every season. In 2 years, I will have a small herd. He could see the herd already, could almost hear it. A herd of goats trades up to cattle. Cattle mean milk, and milk means butter, and a man who sells butter in the town market is a man of standing. His bare room dissolved around him. Now there was a house with a courtyard, a well of his own, servants calling him master. Now there was a marriage, a good one, into a respectable family. He could see his bride's family arriving with gifts, see the lamps burning at the wedding, rows of them, more lamps than his whole village could light. There would be a son. He would name the boy himself, a strong name. He watched the child learn to walk in the courtyard of the house that did not exist, in the wealth that did not exist, in the years that had not happened, and his heart swelled with a father's pride, lying alone on his mat in the dark. The child in the dream toddled near the courtyard well, and the dreaming father lunged to sweep him up. His arm, in the real dark of his real room, swung wide and struck the hanging pot. It came down beside him and broke on the floor, and the grain poured out across the boards with a long sigh, running into the cracks, mixing with the dust. The scholar sat up. For a moment he did not know which world he was in. Then he knew. There was no courtyard, no sun, no herd, no silver. There had only ever been one real thing in the room, one full pot of grain, this evening's actual gift, and it lay scattered in the dust at the foot of his mat. He gathered what he could by moonlight, kneeling on the floor, and it is said that he stayed there a long while after the gathering was done. Not weeping, exactly. Seeing. He had traveled years into a life that was never coming, and while he traveled, he had lost his hold on the only night he actually had. The tale is more than 2,000 years old, and it has survived because so many who hear it recognize the room. Most of us have hung our own pot from the beam and lain beneath it building. The mind that did that to him does it to us daily, and mostly we never notice, because, unlike the scholar, we rarely get the mercy of a breaking pot. So much of an ordinary day is spent living in the not yet, standing in the shower rehearsing a conversation that may never happen, eating a meal without tasting it because the mind is at next month's problem, sitting with people we love while planning, comparing, wanting, elsewhere. And the strangest part is how complete the imagined worlds are. The mind does not sketch its futures, it furnishes them, down to the lamps at the wedding and the name of the unborn son, and then it moves in and starts living there. Meanwhile, a real evening is passing unattended, a real face across the table is going unstudied, a real sky is turning its colors over the street, and no one has looked up. The if-only mind does its damage right here. Whatever it promises about the future, what it costs, is always the present, and the present is the only place a life can actually be lived. The Buddha taught this directly in one of his most loved verses. Do not chase after the past, he said, and do not place your longing in the future. The past is already left behind, and the future has not yet arrived. Look deeply instead at what is here, in this very moment. The scholar's grain did not spill when the lean year came. It spilled while he was dreaming of the lean year. And when a wanted thing is finally obtained, there is real pleasure for an hour or a week, and then the tap on the shoulder comes again with a new object. The mind that spent a year wanting the position spends a month enjoying it, then begins wanting the next one. This is nobody's personal weakness. It is how wanting is built, and the Buddha saw its engine so clearly that he named it in his very first teaching. He called it thirst, thirst for pleasure, thirst for becoming someone, thirst for things to be otherwise. And he compared feeding it to drinking salt water. The drinking itself deepens the thirst. Whole industries in our time have studied this hunger with great care and arranged the world to keep the tap on the shoulder coming, a fresh craving delivered to the palm of the hand every few minutes. There is no need for bitterness about that. It is simply the world we practice in now, and it helps to know it clearly, without blame and without surprise. There is a famous image from the old Greek sailors that Buddhist teachers have long enjoyed borrowing. A captain wished to hear the song of the sirens, the sweetest song in the world, the song that drew ships off their course. So he had his crew bind him to the mast of his own vessel, and when the song came, it was as sweet as promised, and he heard every note of it, and the ship sailed on. That is a picture of a certain freedom. The wanting sings, and it truly is beautiful, and there is a ground in a person from which the whole song can be heard without the hands ever leaving the wheel. Hearing is allowed. Believing is optional. Yet the teaching of this night is that every cloud holds a seed, and craving is no exception. To find its seed, we need a second story, one about wealth, from an old trading city in the East. There was once a merchant of that city, a man of real fortune, with warehouses along the river and a fine walled house. He had one son, a boy of 10, growing up soft among servants. The merchant, who had known poverty in his own youth, began to worry that the boy understood nothing of the world. So when harvest season came, he arranged a journey. They would travel to a farming village in the hills and stay among the poor for the harvest days, so the boy could see with his own eyes how little other people had. They rode out through the city gates and into the hills, and a farming family received them, as villages do, with the best of what there was. And the days passed. The boy vanished into village life almost at once. He was in the creek to his waist with the farm children by the first afternoon. He helped drive the geese in at dusk, got everything wrong, and was taught by a girl half his size. At the evening meal, neighbors kept arriving with a dish or a story until the little house overflowed and the eating spilled into the yard. One night the boy slept on the flat roof of the granary beside 2 other boys, and the sky came all the way down to the hills on every side, and he lay counting stars until the counting stopped meaning anything. When the harvest ended, father and son rode home. For a long while the merchant let the silence run, pleased with himself, and then he asked the question he had been planning from the beginning. "Well," he said, "now you have seen it. Did you see how poor they are?" "I saw, Father," the boy said. "And what did you learn?" The boy was quiet for a moment, gathering it all. Then he said, "I saw that we have 1 dog in our courtyard, and they have 4, and all 4 sleep beside the children. We have a bathing pond behind our walls, and they have a creek with no end to it. Our garden has oil lamps carried from across the sea. They have the stars. We buy our food from men we do not know. They grow theirs and give half of it away. Our walls keep us safe. and they are kept safe by friends. We have servants, Father. They have each other. The merchant said nothing. The city was coming into view below them, his warehouses along the river, his fine house behind its wall. Thank you, Father, the boy said, for showing me how poor we are. The story does not record that the merchant answered. It records that he rode through his own gates that evening more slowly than he had ever ridden through them, looking at everything as if he had been away for years. The boy had stumbled onto the seed inside all wanting, and he found it in the one place the if-only mind never looks, here. What every craving is truly reaching for, beneath its endless list of objects, is the feeling the boy had on the granary roof. Wholeness, enoughness, belonging inside one's own life. The sage Nisargadatta Maharaj pointed straight at this when he told his students that they did not desire enough, that they kept spending an infinite longing on small purchases. Why not want the whole thing? He asked them. Complete peace, complete freedom. The longing in us is that size. It was never going to be filled by anything smaller, which is why nothing smaller has ever filled it. Each little craving is that vast longing, misread, and spent on things far too small to hold it. This is also why the tradition never asks us to kill desire, whatever people assume about Buddhism from a distance. There is skillful desire all along the path, the wish to understand, the wish to be kind, the wish to wake up, the wish that has you listening tonight. The Buddha himself was moved by an enormous desire, the resolve to find the end of suffering for all beings, and he never once called that a defilement. A parent's wish to raise a child well, a healer's wish to ease pain, a craftsman's wish to make one thing truly well before he dies. These desires enlarge the person who carries them. They can be told apart from craving by a simple mark. They leave the present intact. The teaching draws one line only, and it runs between the desires we see through and the desires that see through us. When wanting arises and is recognized, felt, and read down to its root, it becomes a compass pointing home. When it runs unrecognized, it becomes the pickpocket's eyes, and the saint stands before us unseen. It is the same energy in both cases. Everything depends on the seeing, and the seeing is available in any ordinary hour, because a craving is one of the most honest events in the body. It has a location and a temperature. It leans forward. It can be felt as plainly as hunger, because it is a kind of hunger. And like hunger, it tells the truth about itself to anyone who pauses long enough to listen. So perhaps, somewhere in the days ahead, a wanting will rise for a purchase, a taste, a glance at the glowing screen, and there might be room for one unhurried breath before anything happens. A breath spent feeling the wanting itself instead of the wanted thing. Where does it live in the body? What is it actually asking for? No refusal is required, and no indulgence either. Only acquaintance. Some people discover, meeting their cravings this way, that a surprising number of them are asking for rest, or for company, or simply to be noticed, and that the noticing alone sends them on their way satisfied. Enough is a taste, and it is available right now, in this bed or this chair, in this breathing body that lacks nothing in this exact moment. Rest inside that taste for a while, letting it be as full as it wants to be. And whenever the path calls again, we will learn how the guests of the heart were greeted at the door in the old monasteries. The Thai forest master, Ajahn Chah, one of the most beloved Buddhist teachers of the last century, had a way of describing the mind that his students never forgot. The mind, he said, is like a child. It tugs at your sleeve all day long. It wants candy. It wants to see the elephants. It wants to go to the festival. It wants. And you do not hate a child for being a child. You do not argue with it or wish it were a stone. You simply know this is a child. You hold its hand. You stay steady, and you love it while it pulls. There is a whole method of practice folded inside that image, and it opens best step by step. We have seen the moods as weather, found the still point, discovered the seed in every cloud, and traced the wanting mind to its root. The question that remains is the practical one. When a strong state actually arrives, at the door of an ordinary evening, what do? The Master's answer with a single surprising word: welcome. Not because the visitor is pleasant, because welcoming is the only thing that works. Everything else, the bolting of doors, the pretending no one is home, has been tried countless times by countless people, and the knocking only grows louder. There is an old teaching that what we resist persists, and what we receive can finally move on. Buddhist practice takes this seriously enough to build a whole way of meeting experience around it, a way of bowing to what comes. A tale told across many lands and dressed many ways shows this better than any explanation. Here it wears the dress of the eastern mountains. 2 wandering monks came down out of the high passes one autumn evening into a prosperous town in the foothills. They had walked far. Their robes were grey with road dust, their sandals worn through, and the light was failing. In that country, it was held a blessing to feed a traveller, so they went from door to door in the ordinary way, bowls in hand, asking nothing but a corner by someone's fire. The town was wealthy, and the doors were handsome, and one by one, the doors closed. A merchant looked at their dust and said his house was full. A magistrate's servant told them the master saw no one after dark. At some houses the lamps were simply blown out at their knock, and the 2 monks stood in the street hearing families fall silent on the other side of good timber. They walked the whole town this way, from the fine center to the plain edges, and received not one open door. At the very last edge of town, where the road turned back into wilderness, stood a hut with 1 room and a roof of old thatch. An elderly wood-gatherer lived there with his wife, 2 people grown so old together that the neighbors could not remember one without the other. The monks knocked, more from habit than hope. The door opened at once, and it opened wide. "Travelers," the old woman said, as if the evening had been waiting for exactly this. "Come in out of the cold. Husband, build up the fire." What followed was the finest welcome poverty could offer. The old man steadied their table's short leg with a piece of broken pottery, apologizing for it twice. The old woman put on the last of the rice, all of it, and sent her husband out to cut the few winter vegetables. They gave the travelers the 2 stools and sat on the floor themselves, and they asked the monks about the mountains and the far towns with the hunger of people who love the world they will never see. When the rice was served, the hosts took almost none, insisting they had eaten earlier, which the monks understood to be a kind lie. And then, in the middle of the meal, the old woman went to refill the rice bowls and stopped. She looked into her pot for a long moment, then looked at her husband. The pot was full. She had cooked the last of their rice and served most of it, and the pot stood full to the brim, the grains white and steaming as if just made. She served again, and again the pot stood full. The old couple set down the ladle and turned to their guests, and the two travelers no longer looked entirely like weary monks. There was a stillness around them that made the little room feel suddenly like a great hall. "You opened the last door," one of them said. "Every home in this town was tested tonight, and the whole town's blessing has come to rest on this one roof. Ask for anything." The old man and the old woman looked at each other, and they did not ask for wealth, and they did not ask for youth. The old man spoke for them both. "We have served each other all our lives," he said. "Let us serve something together until the end, and let neither of us be left alone in this world after the other." It was granted. The travelers went on with the dawn, and where the hut had stood, the couple found a small temple, plain and strong, with room for any traveler who came, and they became its keepers. They swept its floor and fed its guests for the rest of their long lives, and they were never parted. Travelers in later years told of two old trees at the temple gate, grown so close through the seasons that their branches had woven into a single crown, and no one could say where the one tree ended and the other began. The blessing knocked on every door in town. Only the door that opened received it. This is the entire teaching of hospitality that Buddhist practice applies to the inner life, and it changes everything about how a difficult evening can go. Because the states of the heart arrive exactly like those travelers, dusty and unpromising. Fear knocks. Grief knocks. Loneliness stands at the door looking like nothing anyone would invite in. And the town in us does what the town in the story did. Lamps out, silence, good timber between us and the visitor. Yet the old wisdom keeps insisting that these guests carry something, and that the carrying is the reason they came. So how does the door actually get opened? The practice the masters teach has a handful of natural movements, and they flow into one another like a single bow. The first movement is the welcome itself, which can be as small as an inward nod. You again. Come in then. It sounds like nothing, and it reverses the habit of a lifetime, because it ends the war before the war starts. The second movement is naming. There is fear here. There is wanting. There is sadness moving through. Naming sounds simple too, and it carries a hidden depth. Saying there is fear draws a breath of space around the visitor, where saying, "I am afraid," hands the visitor the keys to the house. The Buddha taught this precisely in his instructions on awareness. A mind with anger is known simply as a mind with anger, a mind with longing as a mind with longing. Naming has been at the center of the practice from the very beginning. A named guest is a guest. An unnamed guest becomes the host. The third movement is feeling, and this one matters most. The named state is felt in the body, where it actually lives. The tight band of fear across the chest, the heat of anger in the face and hands, the hollow of loneliness under the ribs. The body never lies about the weather, and attention given to the body is attention taken back from the story the mood is telling. This is a genuine trade, and it always works in the same direction. Every mood runs on two tracks at once, a story in the head and a sensation in the body, and the story is where the suffering multiplies. The story recruits the past and the future, builds its case, calls its witnesses. The sensation, met directly, is only ever this: some tightness, some heat, some heaviness, changing moment by moment, entirely survivable. Teachers across the centuries have pointed their students from the first track to the second for exactly this reason. In the body, a feeling has a size. In the story, it has no edges at all. Then comes softening, wherever holding is found, the jaw, the shoulders, the belly, the way a fist relaxes finger by finger. And finally, when there is room for it, the old question the tradition has always kept nearby, is this who I am? It is asked without any expected answer, the way one might hold a stone up to the light. And held against that question, every state gives the same honest reply. It is something moving through. It was not here yesterday morning. It will not be here next spring. It has arrived and it will leave. And the one who watches it arrive and leave is the one asking. The sky notes another cloud crossing. And here is the mercy hidden in the method. The outcome is not your job. After the bow, the state may leave, may stay, or may even grow for a while, and none of those outcomes measures you. Your whole task was the hospitality. The rest belongs to the weather, and weather has always known how to pass. Faithfulness without control. One more story shows what that looks like stretched across a whole lifetime. A traveler once crossed a high, ruined country, a land of bare hills, where the springs had failed, and the villages stood abandoned, doors hanging open, wells dry. Wind and thin grass, and no one. After days of this, he came upon a single inhabited place, a stone hut, a fold of sheep, and a shepherd, a man of few words, who took him in without fuss and gave him water from a deep, sweet well he had dug himself. That evening the traveler watched his host do a curious thing. The shepherd poured a heap of acorns onto the table into the lamplight and began to sort them, one by one, setting the sound ones apart, discarding the cracked and the small. He did this with the care of a man counting silver. When he had exactly 100 perfect acorns, he stopped and went to bed. The next day, walking out with his flock, the shepherd carried an iron rod, and as he walked he pressed holes into the earth, and into each hole he dropped an acorn and covered it. The traveler, following, finally asked, "Whose land is this?" "I don't know," the shepherd said. "It belongs to people who have forgotten it." "Then why plant it?" The shepherd looked out over the dead hills. "The land is dying for lack of trees," he said. "I have nothing pressing to do, so I plant trees." He had been doing it for 3 years, alone, 100 acorns a day. He supposed most of them died. Tens of thousands had sprouted. Whether any would survive the goats and the droughts, whether anyone would ever see them, whether the work meant anything at all, he could not know, and he had visibly stopped needing to know. He sorted, he walked, he planted. The traveler left the next morning and did not come back for many years. When he did return, he almost lost his way, because the country had changed. Across the slopes where nothing had stood, young oaks now grew shoulder to shoulder, mile after mile of them, a grey-green haze thickening into forest. Streams had returned to beds that had been dry for generations, and where water went, life followed. Willows, meadows, birdsong. The shepherd, older now and wordless as ever, was still sorting acorns by lamplight. The traveler came back once more in his own old age, and this time he walked through tall forest and heard axes and children, because the villages had filled again. Water ran in the fountains. Gardens stood behind the rebuilt houses. Few of the people living there knew the forest had a beginning, and fewer still knew it had a gardener. The old shepherd was found at last sitting outside his same stone hut, looking at the trees. Asked how he had done it, he considered the question longer than seemed necessary. "I planted them," he said. "The rain grew them. planted them. The rain grew them. A whole spiritual training lives inside those two sentences, and it is the same training as the bow. The shepherd gave his mornings to the acorns and gave the outcome entirely away, and that combination, full effort and open hands, is what the masters mean by practice. He could not make one oak grow. He could plant 100 acorns. The line between those two is the line between what is ours and what was never ours, and peace lives on the near side of it. Every act of inner hospitality is an acorn like that. The fear bowed to tonight may return tomorrow, and the bough was still not wasted. Something was planted in ground you cannot see. And this is how all the slow good things of a life actually work, though we rarely say it aloud. A parent plants 1,000 small kindnesses into a child and cannot know which ones will take root, and plants them anyway. A person mending a long habit fails and begins again, and every beginning is an acorn, whatever the day's weather does to it. All of it is sorting seeds by lamplight, and all of it is entrusted to the rain. People who tend their hearts this way describe the same slow surprise the traveler had, coming back after years to find the bare country green, patience where there used to be panic, streams running in old dry places, and no single day they could point to when it changed. A forest never arrives in a single day. One morning there is simply shade where there never was, and birdsong, and the memory of the bare hills grows hard to believe. Should a strong feeling come to the door in the days ahead, the whole method can travel with you in miniature, light as a breath. Open, name, feel where it lives, soften around it, wonder, without needing an answer, whether it is really who you are, and then let the outcome go, the way the shepherd left the growing to the rain. Even remembering one movement of the bow in the middle of a crowded day is an acorn in the ground. There is no schedule for this, and no score being kept anywhere. Hospitality is learned the same way the old couple learned it, one knock at a time, over an unhurried lifetime, and every door open makes the next one lighter on its hinges. Rest here now, the way the shepherd rested at his door in the evening. Work done, hills seeded, nothing to watch over. Whenever you feel like walking on, there is a voice waiting in the next valley that nearly everyone will recognize, and it is time we found out whose voice it really is. The third ancestor of Zen, Master Senkan, opened his great poem on the trusting heart with a line that has startled students for 14 centuries. "The great way is not difficult," he wrote, "for those who have no preferences. Stop picking and choosing," the poem goes on, "and everything becomes clear. Set up the smallest distinction, this against that, and heaven and earth are split apart. Picking and choosing." Senkan was pointing at the judging mind, the constant inner activity of measuring everything as good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse. And of all the things the judging mind measures, its favorite subject, its lifelong obsession, is you. Nearly everyone knows the voice. It reviews the day at midnight. It replays the awkward sentence from the meeting. It compares the body in the mirror to bodies it has decided are correct. It says, too slow, too much, not enough. Again, in a tone so familiar that most people have never once thought to ask the obvious question. Whose voice is that? Because here is what the masters noticed. The judging voice did not come with you. Watch a very small child, and you will find wonder, frustration, delight, tears, everything except self-condemnation. A 3-year-old who falls down does not lie there reviewing her mistakes. The verdict-giving voice arrived later, from outside, and it was installed so early and so deep that it now runs in your own accent and calls itself you. Where a thing comes from changes everything about how to hold it, so let us go looking for the source. A story about a mountain and a boy points the way. High in an eastern range, long ago, a boy lived with his grandmother in a village that clung to the side of a valley. One clear morning, the two of them set out up the mountain path to gather herbs, the grandmother ahead with her basket, the boy behind, watching everything except his own feet. Which is how, on a stony bend above the gorge, he fell. It was a light fall, more surprise than hurt, but he was small, and it was sudden, and he cried out, a sharp "ah" that rang across the valley. And the valley answered him. "Ah," it called back, in his own voice, from the far walls. The boy scrambled up, staring across the gorge. "Who is that?" he shouted. "Who is that?" The mountain shouted back. He looked at his grandmother, who kept walking as if nothing were happening, and something hot rose in him, the embarrassment of the fall, looking for somewhere to go. "You are stupid," he yelled across the valley. "You are stupid," the valley yelled back, instantly, with exactly his anger in it. Now he was frightened as well as furious. There was someone over there, someone mocking, someone who somehow knew the worst thing to say. He turned to his grandmother with tears standing in his eyes. "Grandmother, there is a boy across the valley and he hates me." The old woman set down her basket on a stone. She stood beside him, facing the great open air, and she called out in her cracked, strong voice, "You are brave. You are brave," the valley declared. "I love you," called the grandmother. "I love you," the mountain answered, and the words rolled back and forth between the walls, softening as they went, until the last of them faded like a bell. The boy stood very still. His grandmother picked up her basket, and they walked on a while before she spoke. "There is no one across the valley," she said. "The mountain gives back whatever is given to it. It was your own voice both times, little one. It carried your anger back to you, and it carried my love back to me. The mountain does not choose. It only returns what it is given." They gathered herbs through the morning, and on the way down, she finished the teaching, because grandmothers in the old stories always know when a lesson is only half planted. "Remember this when you are grown," she said. "The heart is also a valley. Words called into it when you are young go on echoing for a lifetime. One day you will hear voices in yourself, praising you or scolding you, and they will sound as near and as real as that boy across the gorge sounded to you. When that day comes, remember the mountain. Ask where the voice was first called from and by whom. An echo can be heard with respect. It does not have to be obeyed. And remember also which words you call into the valleys of other people, because the mountains keep everything and they give it all back." An echo can be heard with respect. It does not have to be obeyed. Carry that up close to the inner critic and watch what it reveals. The scolding voice in an adult mind has all the marks of the boy's tormentor across the gorge. It sounds external and authoritative. It knows exactly the worst thing to say. And it is an echo. Somewhere far back, those words were called into the valley by real voices. A father, with standards no child could reach, a teacher with a red pen and a tired temper, a household where love arrived only after performance, a schoolyard, a sibling, a passing stranger on the wrong afternoon. The speakers are long gone. Some have softened with age, some have apologized, some have died, and their old words are still crossing and recrossing the valley in your accent now, presenting themselves each morning as today's news. Seeing this changes the relationship at the root because it reveals the voice's deepest secret. It is impersonal. A recording has no knowledge of the present. The voice that says you always ruin things is not looking at your life. Recordings cannot look. It is simply playing as it played last year and the year before, triggered by weather, repeating sounds first captured decades ago. There is something almost eerie about it when seen clearly. People who shaped those words may have been gone for 20 years, and their opinions are still speaking inside a living mind, still commenting on how the dishes are washed, how the money is handled, how the grief is being carried, offering verdicts on a life they never saw. The Buddha taught that we are shaped by causes reaching far back beyond our seeing, and the inner critic is one of the plainest examples any of us will ever meet. Watch it at work on an ordinary night and the whole pattern shows itself. A person lies down after a full day, a day of honest effort and small failures like every human day, and the review begins. The sentence from the morning meeting, replayed. The tone taken with the child, replayed. The years measured against imaginary years. And the reviewer sounds so authoritative, so intimate, that it never occurs to the listener in the bed that they are hearing a very old broadcast, assembled long ago from other people's fears, playing on schedule because the lights went out. That is the moment the grandmother's teaching is for. It was your own valley all along, returning what was once called into it. The mystic poet Rumi, from the Sufi tradition, told a story that Buddhist teachers love to borrow, about how deep this judging habit runs. 4 devout men entered a house of prayer, he said, and knelt in real devotion. The call to prayer sounded outside, and the first man, without thinking, murmured, "Is it time already?" The second whispered, "You spoke. Your prayers do not count now." The third hissed, "Uncle, do not scold him. You have done the very thing yourself." And the fourth said aloud, "Thank heaven I have made none of their mistakes." 4 sincere hearts, and inside 3 breaths the judging mind had caught every one of them, including, most sweetly, the one who judged the judges. Rumi is not mocking these men. He is showing us the habit itself, running on its own, catching the innocent and the earnest alike. If it catches everyone, it was never really about you. There is one more turn to this teaching, and it is the deepest one. The critic does not merely misjudge this detail or that. Its entire way of measuring can be wrong from the ground up, and a story much loved in the old island monasteries shows how. An accomplished abbot was once sailing between the far islands of the north, visiting the small temples of that coast, when the boatman told him of 3 old hermits who lived alone on a bare island far off the shipping lanes. Forest monks of the simplest kind, the boatman said, honest as stones, and famous in those waters for one strange thing, their chanting. The 3 old men knew no proper sutra. Somewhere in their long isolation they had lost or never learned the true words, and what they chanted, morning and night, was a homemade verse of their own, a few plain lines about the 3 of them, and the great compassion, repeated endlessly, artless as a child's rhyme. The abbot, a careful guardian of the tradition, had the boat turn aside. He found the island as described, and the hermits as described. 3 old men brown as driftwood, overjoyed at a visitor, bowing again and again. He heard their chant and winced. And so, out of genuine kindness, he settled on a stone in the sun and set about teaching them the true sutra, line by line, syllable by syllable. It went hard. The old men were willing and hopeless. One would gain a line and lose it while the second was learning his. Their tongues stumbled, their memories slid, and they kept bowing in shame at each failure, begging his patience, beginning again. The abbot labored the entire day, repeating each phrase 20 times, 30, and slowly, painfully, the sutra took hold. By dusk, the 3 could chant it through together, word for word. The abbot blessed them, told them to chant only this from now on, and sailed, with the evening tide, tired and satisfied, a duty well done. The moon rose while the ship ran south, laying a silver road on the water. And along that road, some hours into the night, the helmsman began to shout. The abbot came up from below and looked and gripped the rail. Something was coming after the ship across the open sea, moving fast on the surface of the water. 3 somethings. 3 old men, hand in hand, walking on the moonlit sea as if it were a meadow, their robes luminous, their faces distressed. They reached the ship's side and bowed, all together, on the water. "Forgive us," they called up. "We have forgotten the true words." While we kept repeating them, we held them, but we stopped to rest, and a line fell out, and now it has all gone to pieces. "Teach us again, we beg you." The abbot stood at the rail for a long moment, looking down at 3 old men standing on the sea. Then he bowed to them, lower than he had bowed to anyone in his life. "Fathers," he said, "forget my teaching. Go home and chant as you have always chanted. Your own words reach all the way. And when you chant tonight, remember this sailor." The 3 bowed and turned and walked back along the moon's road toward their island, hand in hand, until the light closed behind them. By every standard the abbot knew, the hermits were doing it wrong. Wrong words, wrong form, decades of error. And the sea itself stood up to overrule the verdict. Their crooked little chant, carried by whole hearts, had gone further than perfect form ever goes, so much further that the judge ended the night bowing to the judged. This is what the inner critic can never see, because measuring is all it knows. It checks your words against a form, your progress against a schedule, your life against lives it has imagined, and it finds error everywhere, and its findings can be perfectly accurate and completely beside the point. What the hermits had, sincerity, wholeness of heart, the thing that actually reaches, does not appear anywhere on the critic's instruments, which means its harshest verdicts about you have been measuring the wrong thing all along. Somewhere beneath every clumsy chant of yours, every stumbling effort the voice has ever mocked, there has been a walking on water that it simply has no way to detect. So the tradition suggests a strange and freeing response to the old echo: gratitude. When the voice starts up, it can be received the way one receives an aging relative who repeats the same warnings at every visit. "Thank you. I hear you. I know you mean to keep me safe." Because that is usually what the recording was for at the very beginning. Somebody's harshness was once somebody's fear for a child, passed down in the only shape they had for it. The critic is a guard who was hired long ago by people doing their anxious best, and no one ever told him the danger has passed. He needs to be thanked and allowed to stand down, one visit at a time, because fighting an echo only fills the valley with more shouting. This is the still point again, wearing new clothes. And none of it means throwing away discernment. The path asks for clear seeing at every step, and clear seeing includes seeing one's own actions truthfully. But discernment and self-judgment work in opposite directions, and telling them apart may be one of the most useful skills a person ever learns. Discernment looks at an act. That word landed badly. This habit is costing me. Tomorrow can be done differently. It is specific, it is workable, and it leaves the person intact. The critic skips the act and goes straight for the being. You are the kind of person who. It is global, it is hopeless by design, and nothing workable ever comes out of it, because its business was never improvement. One is a lamp held up to the path. The other is only weather with an old voice, and by now, you know what to do with weather. Perhaps in some coming quiet moment, when the familiar commentary starts, there can be a single curious question held up to it, the grandmother's question. Whose voice was this first? No digging is needed, and no blame of the long-gone speakers either, most of whom were only passing on echoes of their own, valleys answering valleys back through the generations. Just the asking is enough to turn a verdict back into a sound. One more thing the mountain is returning. And now and then, deliberately, a kind word can be called into your own valley instead, spoken inwardly with the grandmother's steadiness, to begin its own years of echoing. Let the mountains fall silent for a while now, and rest in the wide evening air between them. When you are ready, we will go on together, down to where the heart keeps its oldest heat, and find what has been protected there all along. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha gave one of his shortest and most famous teachings. Hatred is never ended by hatred, he said. By love alone is it healed. This is an ancient and unending law. He did not call anger evil, and he did not order it crushed. He said something more precise. The heat cannot be used to cure itself, and something warmer is needed. In those few words he set the direction for how the whole tradition meets the hottest weather of the heart. The problem was never the energy, only the blindness with which it was carried. Anger is the energy that draws the most blindness. It is also, for many people, the most shameful of the weathers and the most exhausting, because a heart that hardens is doing very heavy work. The muscles of the face tighten, the chest locks, the breath goes short and high, and the whole body organizes itself around a single mission: push this away. What gets pushed is sometimes a person, sometimes a situation, sometimes a memory. And what the pushing costs, in stiffness and sleepless hours and things said that cannot be unsaid, accumulates quietly across a life like a debt nobody agreed to. So we turn now to the heat in the chest and to what lies beneath it. Because the tradition looks under anger the way a gardener lifts a stone, and what it has found there, always, is something softer, a hurt, a fear, or a love that could not bear what it was seeing. The heat was a second layer, thrown over the first, because the first was harder to feel. A story from the old monasteries shows this more honestly than any explanation. It concerns a nun who came to a mountain temple for a season of silent practice. She had carried something heavy to the temple, some old grief or old anger she did not name, and she had come to set it down in the only way she knew, by sitting still until the weather passed. The lower walking hall was her one comfort, a small room with worn boards and a view of rain-washed hills. And each morning before dawn she walked there, slow step after slow step, following her breath. Then a stonecutter came to repair the temple wall outside that hall. He arrived with his tools on the first morning of her second week, and the hammering began. It was a steady, heavy sound, iron on stone, hour after hour, vibrating through the floor and into her feet and up her spine. The whole temple could hear it. She alone was walking 3 paces from it. She tried at first to include the sound, the way the teachers taught. Sound is just sound, she told herself. It is hearing that adds the story. She breathed and walked and breathed and heard the hammer fall and breathed again, and for a few steps at a time she could hold it all in one room. Then the hammer hit a seam in the stone, and the blow rang out with a crack that went through her like a nail, and the careful holding shattered, and she was angry. She tried loving kindness. This stonecutter must have his own burdens, she told herself. He works in the cold all day. Surely he carries pains she knows nothing about. She sent him warmth with each step, the traditional phrases, "May you be well," "May you be free from suffering," and for a little while, a thin kindness held. Then the hammering shifted to the section of wall directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the vibration in her teeth, and the loving kindness collapsed so completely that what stood in its place was raw and clean and unmistakable. She hated him. She hated the hammer. She hated the wall. She hated that she was here at all, and the hatred was so honest that even trying to cover it again felt like a lie. She stopped walking. She stood in the center of the hall, and because she had come here to be honest, she was honest. She named it inside, one word at a time. Hating, hating, hating. Nothing happened for a while. The hammer kept falling. The naming kept going. And then, from underneath the hatred, from somewhere much lower and much older, tears came. They rose without any story attached, without any reason she could give, and she stood there and wept, in the middle of the hall, in the middle of the hammering, with no one to see and no one to explain to. She did not know what the tears were for. She only knew they had been waiting under the anger for a long time, and that the anger had been standing over them like a locked door. The hammering went on. The tears finished. She wiped her face and began to walk again, and something had shifted. The sound of the hammer was still there, still loud, still close. But it was sound. It arrived at her ears and was known and passed through. It did not hook into anything anymore, because the thing it had been hooking into, the thing underneath, had come up and been felt. She walked and breathed, and the stonecutter hammered, and after a while the 2 rhythms became part of the same morning, neither one more important than the other. When, an hour and a half later, the stonecutter packed his tools and left, the silence that followed was different from the silence she would have expected. She had been certain all morning that silence would be a relief. When it came, it was simply different. Not better. Just the next weather. She walked on in it, and for the first time in weeks, her steps felt light. Beneath the hatred lay tears. Beneath the tears lay something finished, something that had been waiting to be felt for longer than the season of practice, longer perhaps than she could remember. The anger had been a lid on it, a thick iron lid, because what was underneath was softer and more painful than the anger, and some part of her had decided long ago that the soft thing was too much to bear. So the heat came instead, every time, standing guard at the door of the grief. This is how anger almost always works, and seeing its structure clearly is one of the most useful things a person can do. There are 3 common roots beneath any anger. The first is hurt. Someone was wounded, and the heat rose to protect the wound the way a hand flies to a burn. The second is fear. Something felt threatening, and the heat rose to make the frightened self look large, the way an animal puffs up when it is cornered. The third is the conviction that the world should be other than it is, which sounds like strength and is usually the most exhausting root of all, because the world will not hold still for any opinion about it for long. A person can spend decades maintaining the conviction that a family member should have been different, that a career should have gone another way, that life itself owes something it has not paid, and the heat of that conviction burns day and night, long after the original event has cooled to ash. Under each root, if followed far enough, there is a softer thing asking to be felt. The hurt wants compassion. The fear wants safety. The conviction wants justice and order, a world where things are right. None of these are small wishes, and none of them are wrong. The heat that rose to serve them was doing its honest best with the tools it had. But heat, in the end, is a clumsy guardian. It burns the thing it meant to protect as often as it burns the threat, and most people, looking back on the angers of a lifetime, can count more damage done to what they loved than to whatever they were angry at. The sharp reply that hit the wrong person. The cold silence that lasted months too long. The door slammed so hard the child on the other side of it still flinches at loud sounds, years later. The heat was serving love or justice or self-preservation, and the bill came due somewhere else entirely. The English poet William Blake, writing centuries later, on the far side of the world, arrived at the same understanding the East had reached long before him. Those who enter the gates of heaven, he wrote, are not those who have no passions, or who have curbed the passions, but those who have cultivated an understanding of them. Cultivated an understanding. That is the tradition's invitation exactly. It does not ask us to become people without fire. It asks us to feel the thing underneath the fire, with compassion, beginning always with compassion for oneself, because the one carrying the anger is the one it has been burning the longest. The softening of the hardened heart begins from the inside. The jaw relaxes first, the fist opens first, the forgiveness reaches the self first, and then, from that warmer ground, it can extend outward. In that order. Any other order, the tradition suggests, is building on sand. There is a second face of strength, and a second story is needed to show it, because the seed inside anger is real, and throwing it out with the heat would be a waste. This one takes place in the old Zen monasteries of the East, and it has been told by monks for centuries. An army had come to a province, as armies do in troubled times, and the soldiers swept through town after town demanding submission. In one small town at the foot of a mountain, word came that the troops would arrive by morning. Through the night the town emptied. Merchants loaded carts, families carried children, the magistrate folded his papers and rode south. By dawn the streets were bare. At the top of the town stood a Zen temple, and when the troops arrived and marched up through the abandoned streets, they found every door open and every room empty, except one. The old abbot sat in the meditation hall as he did each morning, sweeping the floor. He had refused to leave. The monks had begged him. He had shaken his head and spoken of the temple lamps and of a bedridden old woman in a house at the temple gate who could not be moved, and he had gone on sweeping. The general entered the temple in full anger, spurs ringing on the stone, and found a bald old man with a broom who did not look up. "Do you know who I am?" the general demanded. The abbot went on sweeping. "I am a man," the general said, "who could run you through without blinking an eye." The abbot set his broom against the wall and looked at the general for the first time. His face was calm, his voice level, and his eyes held no challenge and no fear. "And you," he said, "are looking at a man who could be run through without blinking an eye." There was a silence in the hall. The general's hand, which had moved toward the hilt at his side, stopped. His scowl loosened. Something in his posture changed. Some hardness broke, and what replaced it was not weakness, but recognition, the kind one strong thing shows to another. He bowed, once, from the waist, and turned and left the temple. The soldiers withdrew from the town by midday, and the old woman at the gate never learned how close the morning had come. The abbot's strength had no fire in it. His voice carried no contempt. He held the general's eyes without pushing and without retreating, and the general, who understood force as well as any person alive, recognized instantly that what he was looking at was not the opposite of strength, but its purest form, a heart at rest, so deep in itself that nothing outside it could compel a single movement it did not choose. The general bowed to that, because force always bows to it in the end. What cannot be rattled cannot be conquered. What does not push back leaves nothing to push against. And why did the abbot stay? It was not defiance. It was not a point to prove. It was the temple lamps, which had been lit in the same order for generations and would go unlit if the last person who knew the order left. And it was the bedridden old woman at the gate, who could not walk and who had no one else. The abbot's strength was rooted in care, which is the seed that anger has been carrying all along, distorted by heat into something the care itself would not recognize. Remove the heat, and what remains is a person who stays because something matters, who faces what is coming because there is a lamp to be lit and a neighbor to be kept safe. That kind of strength does not rise and fall with the mood. It holds, even when every reasonable voice says run. This is the seed inside the cloud of anger, the wish for strength in the face of what is wrong, the love of justice, the refusal to stand by while something good is harmed. The anger itself is usually the wrong instrument for these wishes, clumsy, costly, burning the wielder. But the wishes are golden. They are the same wishes that moved every great reformer, every parent who stepped between a child and harm, every person who ever stood up quietly and said no to what should not continue. The abbot had these wishes in full measure. He simply carried them in stillness rather than in heat, and the stillness reached the general where the heat never could have. There is nothing passive in this, and the tradition has never said there was. The Buddha himself confronted tyrants, challenged unjust customs, and refused demands he found wrong, clearly and calmly, without blinking an eye. The middle path is not the path of no response. It is the path of a response chosen in freedom, from the still point where the fire has been felt, the grief beneath it has been honored, and the strength that remains after both have passed through is clean enough to do real good. Perhaps in a coming day, some hardness will rise in the chest, the old heat, the old tightening, and there may be a moment before the first word is spoken, when a hand can be placed over the heart, not to push anything down but to ask what is underneath. The heat is trying to protect something. What is it? Sometimes the answer is a hurt so old it has no words, only a feeling. Sometimes it is fear wearing a suit of armor. Sometimes it is love itself, unable to bear what it is seeing. Whatever it is softer than the heat, and it will not harm the hand that finds it. The hand on the heart is the beginning of the softening, and nothing else has to happen tonight. The rest can wait for tomorrow's version of you, who will be a little less armored, a little more at home in the company of what the armor was guarding. Let this place be still now, and warm, the way a room is warm after the fire has burned down to coals. Rest here for a while, letting the warmth do its slow work, and then we will go somewhere the body has been asking to go all evening. In the old Thai forest monasteries, when a monk fell asleep during the afternoon sitting, the teachers did not scold. They had a saying for it, one of the warmest lines in the whole tradition. Sleep, they said, is the poor man's nirvana. It is the peace anyone can enter. It costs nothing, requires no technique, and for a few hours, the whole impossible weight of being a separate self is set aside. No one has to solve anything, earn anything, defend anything. The body lets go, the mind lets go, and something rests. We turn now to heaviness, tiredness, the cloud of dullness that the Buddhist lists call sloth and torpor, and to its secret, which is a genuine thirst for peace in a world that has forgotten how to stop. Every other weather tonight has had urgency to it, craving and anger, and the driven voice of the judge, all of them loud, all of them certain they need immediate attention. This cloud is different. It arrives softly. It says almost nothing. It dims the lamp, and the eyelids grow heavy, and the whole ambitious human project fades for a while into a warm blur. In a culture that admires motion above all things, this is the state people feel most guilty about. Lazy, they call themselves, or undisciplined, and the guilt sends them back to the wheel before the tiredness has finished saying what it came to say. Because dullness, like every weather, came to say something, and its message is often the simplest and truest one the body knows. Rest, please. 2 young monks served at the same temple, and both were earnest in their practice. Each autumn, the monastery gathered firewood for the winter, enough to keep the hall and the kitchen stoves burning through the cold months, and the abbot gave the task each year to 2 monks, a kind of working meditation that lasted a full week. These 2 chose to make it a friendly contest, purely to keep themselves honest. They would work the same hours, from the first bell to the last, in the same stand of trees, and at sunset, the abbot would count the logs. On the first morning, both set to work with energy, their axes ringing in the cold air. The strokes came fast, one tree falling, then the next, and the rhythm of the work carried them past hunger and past the ache in their shoulders. After an hour or so, the younger monk heard the older one stop. He listened. Silence from the other side of the ridge. He smiled to himself and doubled his pace, swinging the axe until his palms burned, because every minute the other man rested was a minute gained. Then the sound of the older monk's axe began again. Both worked on, matching pace. And an hour later, the silence came once more from the far side. 5 minutes, 10. The younger monk kept chopping, sweat running into his eyes, certain now. This was how the week went. Each hour, the older monk stopped, and each hour the younger one pushed harder. By sunset on the last day, the younger monk was worn through, his hands sore, his back stiff and aching. He had not stopped once. The abbot counted the logs. The older monk's pile was larger by a good margin. The younger one stood looking at it for a long time. "How is that possible?" he said. "You stopped every hour. I heard you resting. I never stopped at all." The older monk held up his axe. The blade was bright and clean, its edge sharp as the morning. "I stopped," he said, "but I was not resting. I was sharpening the axe." The abbot, who had been listening from the hall doorway, came forward. She was a small, weathered woman who had lived in that temple since before either young man was born. She took the bright axe in her hands and turned it in the afternoon light. "The axe is the mind," she said, "and the sharpening is what the body has been asking for all along. The mind that never stops grows dull, and the dull mind strikes 10 times where the sharp one strikes once. Learn from the wood, both of you. Even trees rest all winter. Even trees rest all winter." There is a plainness to that teaching that goes past cleverness and arrives at something the body already knows. Every living system on this planet, from the smallest seed to the largest animal, moves between effort and rest, and the rest is not a gap in the work. It is part of it. Roots grow in winter. Muscles rebuild during sleep. The mind, left to idle for an afternoon, makes connections that a week of strain could not produce. The sharpening happens in the pause, and yet we live inside a culture that has tried to abolish the pause. It is possible to buy and sell at any hour, to consume at any hour, to produce at any hour, and the screens in our pockets fill every idle moment with fresh motion before the idleness has time to deliver its gift. 24 hours of waking has been held up as an ideal, or even as a virtue, and the body's objections are treated as weakness. More coffee, more will, more discipline. Push through. The monks in the old monasteries knew better, and so does the body itself, which keeps asking, in the only language it has, for what the culture will not schedule. Sleepiness during practice is treated in the tradition with the same respectful curiosity as every other state. The first question is always the simplest. Are you tired? If the answer is yes, the body has spoken, and the body outranks the schedule. Rest is not a failure of discipline. It is the discipline of a creature who knows its own rhythms. A second reason sleepiness visits is subtler. Modern life runs on high stimulus. Bright screens, urgent sounds, fast speech, novelty after novelty. When all of that stops, as it does when the eyes close and the room grows still, the body interprets the stillness as bedtime, because those are the only conditions left in its day when things are allowed to be calm. The solution to this kind of drowsiness is not more effort. It is more calm in the rest of the day, so that the body stops treating practice as its only chance to let down. And sometimes, the teachers say, the sleepiness is a guard. Something underneath is asking to be felt, some grief or loneliness or confusion, and the mind, rather than feel it, swoons. It sends itself to sleep the way a child hides under the blanket when the room grows strange. When this is seen clearly, it can be held with great tenderness, because the mind that hides is not lazy. It is afraid, and the old word for what it needs is not discipline but compassion. The question is always the same one. What does this energy ask of me? Sometimes the answer is sleep, plain and honest, and sleep should be given without guilt. Sometimes The answer is a walk, a change of posture, a splash of cold water, the kind of briskness that tells the body the day is still happening. And sometimes the answer is that something is waiting under the drowsiness, and when the drowsiness is met with a patient, friendly attention rather than fought or obeyed, it lifts like a curtain, and the thing that was waiting steps forward, often as tears, often as a longing that has no name, and the afternoon changes entirely. Heaviness, then, is a messenger like every other guest of this night, and nothing about it is a private failing. It visits the newest student and the most seasoned abbot alike, and whatever it turns out to be asking on a given evening deserves to be honored without guilt. Because a body listened to learns to trust its keeper, and that trust is where all deep rest begins. There is one more teaching that belongs here, and it asks for a different kind of story, the kind that can be told in a few breaths and goes deeper than any long tale. It comes from the oldest Buddhist records. A devout man once walked a long road to the Buddha, carrying 2 heavy vases of flowers, one in each hand, offerings for the teacher. He arrived in the grove where the Buddha sat and knelt and made his request. "Blessed One," he said, "show me the way to freedom." The Buddha looked at him and at the flowers and said, "Put it down." The man set down the vase in his left hand, carefully, on the grass beside him, and looked up, ready. "Put it down," the Buddha said again. The man hesitated. Then he set down the vase in his right hand. His palms were open now, both hands empty. He looked at the Buddha and waited for the teaching to begin. "Put it down," the Buddha said a third time. The man's face changed. His hands were empty. There was nothing left to set on the grass. He looked at his open palms and at the teacher, and the understanding arrived all at once, landing softly, the way a leaf settles onto water. The letting go was never about the vases. It was never about the flowers. What needed to be set down was the one who was carrying them, the tight center of doing and holding and arriving and performing, the whole effortful self, which had walked the long road without resting once, and which was still carrying everything, even now, even here, even with open hands. He did not move. Something in his shoulders released. Something behind his eyes let go. He knelt there in the grove for a while, lighter than he had been in years, and when he finally rose, the vases were where they lay, and the flowers were still beautiful, and nothing in the world had changed except the grip. There is a teaching inside the third "put it down" that goes very deep, and it has everything to do with rest. The first 2 lettings go are easy to understand. Put down the left hand's burden, put down the right. Anyone can follow that. But the third, when both hands are already empty, asks for something else entirely. Put down the one who is holding. Put down the identity that carried the vases up the road, the one who needed to arrive and to offer and to be seen offering. That identity is what most of us are carrying most of the time, invisibly, heavier than any vase. It is the manager of the day, the assembler of the to-do list, the narrator of the life story, the judge and the defendant and the jury all in one. And what sleep does, 8 hours a night without anyone planning it, is set that whole busy self down in the grass. We do it naturally. We have always done it naturally. The teaching is simply that the setting down does not have to wait for the eyes to close. That grip is what sleep eases every single night, and it is why we love it, and why the forest masters called it what they called it. For a few hours the grip releases entirely. The one who works and worries and defends and judges and plans, the whole elaborate identity is allowed to dissolve, and something rests in its absence that is deeper than the identity ever was. Think of the feeling of finally sinking into a bed after a very long day. There is relief in the body, certainly, but there is also something more than physical. It is the relief of not having to be yourself for a while, not having to hold any position, produce any result, maintain any image. For the hours of sleep, you are excused from the post, and what remains, the breathing, the dreaming, the deep, slow pulse of being alive, asks nothing of you at all. The old Buddhist traditions that studied sleep closely found many layers in that letting go, stages of release as the self thins and finally disappears into something still. They treated the rhythm of waking and sleeping with the same respect they gave to the rhythm of the breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Wake, sleep. Effort, rest. A pulse running through the whole of nature, missed only by a culture that decided the pulse could be overridden. Every other creature on this earth remembers that there are times to be still, times to stop producing, times to curl up and let the warmth hold you. The world is not diminished by your resting. It is held the way night holds the fields and hands them back at dawn. The Tao Te Ching, the ancient Chinese book of the way, speaks directly to this letting go. Rushing into action, you fail, it says. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. Therefore, the master takes action by letting things take their course. She remains as calm at the end as at the beginning. She has nothing, thus has nothing to lose. What she desires is to unlearn. She simply reminds people of who they have always been. She cares for nothing but the way. And because she cares for nothing but the way, she cares for all things. What she desires is to unlearn. That is a strange and lovely phrase, and it arrives at exactly the right hour, because the body, heading now toward rest, is doing its own unlearning. Every night, without any instruction, the body lets go of the day's accumulation, the day's opinions, the day's positions, the day's self, and returns to something prior to all of it. Sleep is the proof that we already know how to let go, and the whole art this night has been exploring is really an extension of what the body practices every night. So as this evening deepens, and if heaviness is arriving, there is permission here, offered freely and without condition, to let it come. The body knows what it needs, and tonight it may need nothing more than rest. No great insight is required. No further effort. The vases have been set down, and the flowers are already beautiful, and the grove is here, and the breathing goes on by itself. Let the eyes close if they want to. Let the weight of the day fall away into the bed, into the floor, into whatever holds you. The poor man's nirvana has been waiting since sunset, and it asks for nothing at all. When something stirs again, and a little wakefulness returns, we will walk on into the last stretch of the night, where the restless mind finally finds out what happens when it stops running. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki, who brought Soto Zen to the West, was once asked by a student what the most important thing in practice was. He said, without hesitation, the most important thing is to find out what is the most important thing. He was not being difficult. He was pointing at the habit that runs deeper than craving or anger or doubt. The habit of always being somewhere other than where we are. The itch, the fidget, the unshakable feeling that this, right now, is not quite it. We come now to restlessness and to its twin, boredom, and to the strange freedom that arrives when both of them are finally allowed to be here without anyone trying to fix them. Of all the difficult weathers, restlessness is the least respected. Anger at least looks strong. Grief at least looks meaningful. Restlessness looks like nothing. It is just the wish to be somewhere else, doing something else. And it arrives over and over through a day, small and ordinary, tugging the attention from one object to the next, filling every pause with reaching. And because it looks like nothing, it is rarely met. The moment restlessness rises, a hand goes to the phone, a door to the kitchen opens, a plan is made, an errand invented. Anything rather than sit in the company of the unbearable feeling that right here is not enough. Yet this is exactly the state the old teachers were most interested in. Because sitting with restlessness turns out to be the door to sitting with anything. The person who cannot stay in one chair with boredom cannot stay with grief, with fear, with loneliness, with love. Every escape from restlessness trains the next escape, and every willingness to stay, even for one more breath, trains the opposite. There is an old story about where the running leads when nothing stops it. A young monk entered a valley monastery with high hopes. He had heard that this was a place of deep practice, and he arrived expecting his mind to settle at last. For the first weeks, the sitting was good. Then the restlessness found him, as it always does. The hall was too cold in the mornings. The chanting was too long. His knees ached and the bell took forever to ring, and the monk beside him breathed too loudly. He told himself the problem was the place. This valley monastery was not the right one. So he left and climbed to a hermitage on a ridge above the tree line, a single hut where he could practice in solitude, free of all the things that had troubled him below. For the first days, the silence was glorious. Then the solitude pressed in. The wind under the door at night made a sound he could not stop hearing. His own thoughts, without anyone else's breathing to cover them, grew enormous. Loneliness arrived, and with it, a boredom so thick it felt like a weight on his chest. He decided the problem was the isolation. He heard of a famous mountain temple, 3 valleys over, where a great teacher lived and 100 monks practiced with iron discipline. Surely that was what he needed, rigor and guidance and a sangha that would hold him. He walked for days to reach it. The temple was everything he had heard, beautiful, strict, orderly, with a teacher whose gaze missed nothing. For one season he was happy. Then the old weather came in through the new windows. The schedule was too rigid. The teacher was too demanding. The food was poor, and the winters were bitter, and the younger monks looked at him sideways because he was new. He lay on his mat at night composing reasons to leave, each one airtight. Before he could leave, the teacher sent him to see the old abbess at a smaller temple on the far side of the mountain, a woman known for her warmth with difficult students. She received him in a room that smelled of wood smoke and tea, and she let him tell the whole story, every monastery, every complaint, and she listened without once interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long while. "How many years have you worn the robes?" she asked. 8 years, he said. She looked at him with something that was not pity and was not amusement, but was close to both, and closer still to love. "I have worn them 70 years, she said, "and not one day have I found this peace you are looking for. Not in this temple, not on any mountain, not in solitude and not in company." He stared at her. "Then what is the purpose?" "The purpose she said, is to stop expecting a day without weather. You are not here to find a calm place. You are here to become the kind of person who does not need one. She poured him tea and told him 2 more things before she sent him back. There is an old teaching about a bird, she said. A bird that keeps moving her eggs from nest to nest because each nest feels wrong never hatches anything. The sitting is the hatching. Stay with your eggs. And there is a monk saying that goes, sit in your room and your room will teach you everything. Not because the room is wise, because you are in it and you are the lesson. He walked back over the mountain to the temple he had been about to leave. The bell rang that evening the same way it always did, and his mat was in the same place, and the monk beside him still breathed too loudly. Nothing in the temple had changed. Something in the demand had. He stayed. He stayed. 2 words and a lifetime of practice in them. Because what actually changed? The monasteries were what they were. The wind under the door did not soften. The neighboring monk did not learn to breathe more easily. What changed was the demand that conditions be different before peace could begin. And that demand, the abbess was saying, is the restlessness. It wears the face of legitimate complaint, and it has an answer for everything, and it will carry a person across every mountain in the world and find the same wind under the door on the far side. Because the wind is not in the door. It is in the demanding. The writer, Mark Twain, from a very different tradition, landed on the same truth from his own angle. My life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, he said, most of which never happened. There is a tender irony in that, and also a precise observation. The restless mind does not suffer from what is actually here. It suffers from the gap between what is here and what it has decided should be here. Close the gap, not by improving the world, but by releasing the demand, and the suffering has no ground left to stand on. This is where the teaching tonight reaches its deepest point, because it applies to every weather that has been named across these hours. What makes any state unbearable is rarely the state itself. It is the resistance to it. Fear plus fighting fear equals panic. Sadness plus refusing sadness equals despair. Restlessness plus the demand that restlessness stop equals a lifetime of running. But fear allowed to be fear, simply felt, simply named, is survivable, and it moves on. Sadness allowed to be sadness fills the eyes and then clears them. Anger allowed to be anger, without being acted on, burns for a while and leaves a clean ash. Think of how this works with something as common as a sleepless night. The mind wakes at 3, and what follows is usually 2 experiences happening at once. The first is the wakefulness itself, which is simply a condition of the body at that hour, a passing state with no opinion about itself. The second is the war with the wakefulness. I must sleep. This will ruin tomorrow. Why does this always happen to me? That war is louder than the wakefulness, hotter, more exhausting, and it feeds the very tension that keeps sleep at a distance. Remove the war, and the wakefulness is just a body lying in the dark, breathing, which is not a crisis. It may or may not become sleep. That is the body's business. But the suffering has ended, because the suffering was never the waking. It was the argument. The old masters taught this in many words, and always came back to the same center. End the argument with reality, and the raw experience, whatever it is, becomes something a human being can hold. an ancient Sufi teaching story, loved equally in Buddhist circles, shows what total willingness looks like from the inside. It is the story of a stream and a desert. A stream came tumbling down from the mountains, gathering strength as it went, leaping over stones, pushing through narrows, crossing every kind of country. It had never been stopped. Then it reached the desert. The stream threw itself at the sand the way it had thrown itself at every obstacle before, with force and confidence. The sand absorbed it. The stream pushed harder. The sand drank it and gave nothing back. Mile after mile, the stream spent itself into dry ground, growing thinner, weaker, beginning to disappear. Then a voice came from the sands themselves, as if the desert were speaking. "The wind crosses the desert," the voice said. "And so can the stream." The stream pulled back. "The wind can fly," it said. "The wind is not water. How can the wind carry me?" "By allowing yourself to be taken up," the sand said. "By letting the wind lift you. You will rise as vapor, and the wind will carry you across, and on the far side you will fall as rain and become a stream again." "But I will lose myself," the stream said. "I will stop being a stream. How do I know I will come back?" "You cannot remain what you are, in either case," the sand answered. "Stay here and you will become a marsh, and even that will dry in time. You will vanish completely. Let the wind take you and your essence crosses over. You have always been carried, in truth. You do not remember it, but the rain that formed you on the far side of the last mountain was once a stream that yielded to the wind above a desert it could not cross. The stream was still for a long time, feeling the sun on its surface and the sand drinking at its edges. Everything in it wanted to keep pushing, because pushing was all it had ever known, and the pushing had always worked before. It was afraid of the sky the way anyone is afraid of an element they have never entered. But the sand was patient, and the sun was warm, and somewhere in the stream a memory stirred, older than its own banks, of having once been rain, of having fallen from a great height into a green valley, of having gathered and run and become itself, and of having been, before all of that, nothing but vapor in the arms of the wind. It remembered being carried. Then it raised its vapor to the wind, and the wind gathered it and carried it high over the desert, and far away, on the green side, it fell as rain into a valley and ran together and was a stream again. The same stream, the one that had yielded. What the thrashing could not accomplish, yielding accomplished, and nothing essential was lost. The stream's mistake was the same mistake the restless monk made, and the same mistake the resistance makes with every difficult feeling, the assumption that the only way to survive is to keep fighting, keep running, keep pushing. The willingness to stop, to be lifted, to let the wind do what the water cannot, is the end of the struggle, and it is the most active thing a heart can do. There are 3 honest outcomes to any inner weather, as tonight has said before, and they belong here again at the deepest level. The state fades. The state stays the same. The state grows, and the willingness to accept whichever of these occurs, without staking the heart's peace on any one of them, is what freedom actually feels like. It does not feel like victory. It feels like setting down a weight you forgot you were carrying, or like unclenching a hand and finding that what you were holding so tightly was never trying to leave. This is not resignation. Resignation is grey and heavy and turns its back. Willingness faces what is here with open eyes and says, "All right, you are welcome too. It is the open door from an earlier hour of this night, applied now to the most uncomfortable guest of all, which is things as they are. Resignation gives up on the world. Willingness gives up the argument with it, and that is an entirely different movement, because the argument was the only thing standing between the person and the world's full, unedited reality, which includes beauty as well as difficulty, and relief as well as pain. People who resign grow dull. People who consent grow vivid. The difference is in the direction of the attention, away from life or toward it. And the astonishing discovery made by every person who has ever truly surrendered an inner fight is that what was unbearable becomes bearable at the exact moment the demand that it be different falls away. The raw fact, stripped of the argument, is almost always smaller than the argument was. The loneliness without the story about what loneliness means is a sensation in the chest, nothing more, survivable, temporary, and oddly intimate, like being alone in a room with yourself for the first time. The boredom, without the story about what boredom means, is an open space, and open spaces can be walked into. The fear without the story is a quickening, a body alert, and the alertness, once the panic is removed, is as close to being fully alive as most people ever get. Perhaps there is one small practice that can grow from this for the restless evenings ahead. When the itch comes, the pull toward the screen or the snack or the plan, there can be a single experiment. Stay one breath longer. Do nothing with the itch. Do not feed it and do not fight it. Just sit in its company, the way the stream sat at the edge of the sand, and notice what happens. Often the itch has a speech it wants to give, full of urgency and reason. And when the speech ends and no one has moved, a strange stillness follows, the way a room feels after an argument no one joined. That stillness is the other side of the desert. Crossing took one breath. Let the crossing carry you now, over whatever sand remains in this night, into whatever waits on the far side. Rest as the rain rests, after falling, gathered and still, belonging to the ground it has found. When you stir again, we will take one last walk together into the question that holds all the other questions inside it. The old Zen teachers spoke of three things a practitioner needs: great faith, great determination, and great doubt. The first two surprise no one, but the third stops people. Doubt? On a path that asks for trust? Yes, because the doubt they meant is not the small, nagging kind that says, "I am no good at this." That kind they handled gently but set aside, the way a parent sets aside a child's complaint about bedtime. The doubt they honored was something larger, a burning question about the nature of things, held open without forcing an answer, carried the way a pregnant woman carries what she cannot yet see. The Zen tradition has a name for it. They call it the great doubt, and they say that where the doubt is greatest, the awakening is greatest too. This final stretch of the night belongs to doubt, and to the surprising place it leads, which is not an answer, but a presence. Doubt has probably been traveling beside this whole episode. The still point sounds beautiful, but can it really hold? The seed in the cloud is a lovely idea, but does it survive Monday morning? The bow, the naming, the softening, all of it makes sense in the warm dark. But what about the cold light? These questions deserve to be honored because they are honest, and because the tradition itself insists on honoring them. A teaching that cannot survive honest doubt has no business being taught. The oldest story on this subject comes from the Buddha's own life, and it makes that startlingly clear. Once, in the early years of his teaching, the Buddha traveled to a small town whose people had a particular problem. Their town sat at a crossroads, and teachers of every kind passed through. Brahmins, wandering sages, ascetics, philosophers, priests, each one announcing that his teaching was the truth and everyone else's was error. They came through season after season, and each one was convincing, and each one contradicted the last. The townspeople, who were earnest and wanted to live rightly, had been pulled one way and then another until they no longer knew what to believe about anything at all. When the Buddha arrived, they came to him with the problem laid out plainly. "Teacher," they said, "we have heard so many teachers, and each one tears down what the one before him built. We are lost. Tell us how to know what is true." The Buddha's answer was, by the standards of any religious teacher, before or since, extraordinary. He did not say, "Believe me." He did not say, "These are my credentials. Look at my years of practice. Consider my lineage. Take my word." He said the opposite. "Of course you are uncertain," he told them. "When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So here is what I would say to you. Do not go by reports. Do not go by legends or traditions. Do not go by scripture. Do not go by logical reasoning alone, or by inference, or by the appearance of things. Do not go by the thought that this person is our teacher, so we must believe. Instead, when you know for yourselves that certain qualities lead to harm and suffering, abandon them. And when you know for yourselves that certain qualities lead to well-being and happiness, enter into them and remain. Know for yourselves. 3 words that change the entire relationship between a teacher and a student. The Buddha was not handing out a doctrine to be swallowed. He was handing back the authority to the people standing in front of him and trusting them to use it. Try the teaching, he was saying. Live it. See what happens in your own heart when you practice kindness, when you meet anger with awareness, when you stop believing every thought. If it reduces suffering, keep it. If it does not, let it go. No book outranks your experience. No teacher outranks your seeing. This is why the tradition has always welcomed doubt and not merely tolerated it. A person who doubts is a person who has not yet traded their seeing for someone else's summary, and that seeing is the only thing the path can actually use. The Zen schools push this even further, making doubt itself the engine of practice. Sit with your question, they said, the way you would sit with a hot coal in your hands. Do not drop it and do not throw it. Hold it until it burns through everything you think you know, and what remains is what is real. That is the great doubt, and it is not the enemy of faith. It is faith's first cousin, because both of them refuse to settle for less than the truth. The Buddha did not shame the doubters that day, or treat their confusion as a weakness. He blessed it, said it was the natural response of an honest mind in a confusing world, and offered the way forward through experience rather than belief. Every person who has ever lain awake wondering whether any of this is real, whether the practice is working, whether the old words spoken in warm rooms at night have anything to do with the cold daylight world, has been standing in that same small town, and the Buddha's answer to them is the same. Of course you doubt. Good. Now test it. There is something else hidden in the Buddha's speech to that small town, and it matters deeply for the fear that always travels with doubt. Fear stands at the edge of every threshold, and the tradition reads it as a sign. There is an old image, found in many Buddhist commentaries, that compares fear to a membrane around the known self. As the self grows and the old boundaries no longer fit, fear rises at the edge like the tightening of a skin about to be shed. If the membrane had a sign on it, it would say, "About to grow." Most of the fears that haunt a practice and haunt a life are this membrane being felt. The fear of what will happen if the anger is released. The fear of what feelings will surface if the busyness stops. The fear that comes at 3 a.m, formless, attached to nothing, just a raw sense that the ground is shifting. These are not signs of danger. They are signs of an old shape reaching its limit and a new one pressing to emerge. The people who have grown the most, in any tradition, are almost always the ones who learn to stand at the membrane and breathe rather than retreat. The fear does not go away. The willingness to stand in it does the growing. So doubt and fear together become a kind of doorway, and the old teacher's advice is always the same: walk through. Do not wait for certainty, because certainty is the one thing honestly lived experience never delivers. Walk through with your questions in your hands, and trust that the walking will teach you more than any answer found before the first step. The last story of this night is the simplest and perhaps the oldest teaching in Zen. It happened on a mountain before a great assembly, and it contains no words at all. The Buddha had been teaching for many years. His students numbered in the hundreds, and among them were scholars, monastics, debaters, and seekers of every kind. One day they gathered on a hillside, and the word had gone out that the teacher would give a discourse. They came with their questions, and there were many. The questions of this whole night were among them: how to meet the storms, how to find the center, how to hold what is difficult, how to live in a world that will not hold still. They sat and waited, and the hillside grew still with expectation. The Buddha stood before them and said nothing. The silence went on. People shifted. Eyes darted. The scholars mentally rehearsed their questions, waiting for an opening. The sun moved. Insects hummed. And still the teacher stood silent. And then, without explanation, he reached down and picked up a single flower from the grass at his feet. A small white flower, ordinary, the kind that grows in any field, and he held it up. That was the discourse. The assembly was confused. Some waited for the explanation. Some whispered to their neighbors. Some grew angry. A teaching was owed, and a flower was not a teaching. The scholars sorted through everything they knew and found no category for this. The silence stretched on, and the confusion deepened, and the flower stayed in the air, turning slowly in the teacher's fingers. Then one student, a monk named Mahakashyapa, who had been sitting in the back, looked up at the flower and smiled. That was all. A flower raised and a smile returned, and between the two of them something passed that had no words and needed none. The Buddha saw the smile and spoke for the first time. "What can be taught with words," he said, "I have given to all of you. What cannot be taught with words, I have just now given to Mahakashyapa." The assembly sat in the sun, and the flower went on being a flower, and the teaching that passed in that exchange became the seed of the entire Zen tradition, carried forward from teacher to student in an unbroken line, never once written down, because it cannot be written. Some things can only be met directly, seen with your own eyes, felt in your own chest. It has to be here. What did Maha Kashyapa understand? The tradition has been asked this question for 1500 years and has never once given a straight answer, because a straight answer would be another finger mistaken for the moon. But something can be said about what did not happen. He did not solve a puzzle. He did not figure out a hidden meaning. He did not have a thought so brilliant that it bridged the gap between the teaching and the taught. What he did, by all accounts, was stop. The thinking stopped. The cataloguing stopped. The scholar's habit of sorting experience into categories stopped. And in the cleared space, the flower was simply there, and he was simply there, and the two of them met in a present moment so complete that nothing was left over to stand outside it and comment on it. The smile was the meeting. Why end a night of words with a story about silence? Because everything this night has offered, the weather and the sky, the still point and the open channel, the seed in the cloud and the bow at the door, the echoes and the softening, the rest and the willingness and the great doubt, all of it, every word of it, has been pointing past itself. The words were fingers, and the moon they pointed at is something that lives in the pause between them, in the space that opens when the talking mind rests and the listening heart takes over. A life lived this way does not grow duller. It grows more vivid than any amount of thinking about life could ever make it. There are more colors, the Masters promise, more textures, more taste in the ordinary bread, and more depth in the ordinary face. Rain sounds like itself again. Sunlight lands on the hand and is felt. The body breathes, and the breathing is enough. This is what practice does when it takes hold. It does not add anything. It removes what was blocking the view. The Zen master Ryokan, who lived alone in a hut on a mountain and wrote poems no one read until long after he was gone, left behind a verse that gathers the whole night into a few lines. For more than 70 years, he wrote, I have been making myself dizzy observing the ways of man. All this coming and going, judging here and there, is a sign of weakness. And now the great way, I braid spring flowers into a ball. The future, the teaching, enlightenment. If a visitor brings such questions, I have only the tranquility of my hermitage to offer an answer. The tranquility of his hermitage. Ryokan did not answer questions about freedom with arguments. He answered them with the room he was sitting in, with the flowers he had braided that morning, with the fact of his presence, whole and untroubled, in one place, on one evening, needing nothing else. And the visitor, if the visitor had eyes to see, understood that the answer had been given before the question was finished. The braided flowers are the world met fully. The tranquility is what remains when the struggle to be elsewhere, to be someone else, to have a different weather, has finally been laid aside. And the hermitage is wherever a person is when the laying aside happens. A mountain hut, a city apartment, a hospital bed, a chair in a kitchen at midnight, with a cup of tea growing cold. Ryokan's hermitage traveled with him because it was never a building. It was the heart at rest. This is what the Tao Te Ching means when it says she simply reminds people of who they have always been. The teachings are not additions. They do not bring something new into the room. They clear away what has been piled on top of something that was already there. The awareness behind every mood, the spaciousness behind every contraction, the steady knowing that has been present since long before the first word of this night. What has been here all along, watching the weathers come and go, untouched, unhurried, is who you have always been. The practice is the remembering. The flower was always in the field. It only needed someone to hold it up and someone to smile. So the great doubt, it turns out, was never an enemy to be overcome. It was the last guest at the door, and when it was welcomed with the same bow offered to every other visitor tonight, it walked in and sat down and turned out to be carrying the most important thing of all, a heart that would not settle for second-hand answers. That heart is trustworthy. It can be trusted with Monday morning and with 3 in the morning and with whatever weather the coming days decide to bring. It has already survived everything this night has named, and it is still here, still listening, still open. That is not a small thing. That may be the only thing. The whole night's journey settles now into this last rest, and nothing needs to be carried out of it. The weather of the heart will go on, as it does, moods arriving and departing, storms and clearings, restlessness and peace, each one passing through the sky that holds them all. The bird behind the waterfall is still at rest. The channels are open and the water finds its way. The acorns are in the ground and the rain knows its work. The old valley echoes are just echoes. The door is open and the guest, whatever guest comes next, will be received. If the eyes are still open, let them rest closed now. Let the breath do what it does, the oldest rhythm, in and out, the middle way, the body has always known. The flower is in the field and the smile is here. Tonight the heart's weather was given its true name, weather. Passing, impersonal, arising from conditions older than any of us, and crossing a sky that has never once been harmed by its storms. We found a place to stand in the middle of it all, a still point where nothing needs to be pushed down and nothing needs to be poured out. We looked inside the hardest clouds and found seeds of wholeness, strength, peace, and the courage to grow. We learned to bow to what arrives, name it, and let it pass in its own time. We heard the old echoes for what they are, and watched the hardened heart soften into something stronger than hardness ever was. We rested, and let the resting be enough. We stopped running, and found we already belonged where we stood. And we sat with the great doubt until a flower was held up in the silence, and a smile answered it. All of this happened in the same heart that will wake tomorrow to the same world, with the same weather moving through it. And that is enough. The sky has always been large enough for its storms, and so have you. Wherever you are in the deep night, may your weather be held with the kindness shown to a guest at the last door, and may the stillness underneath it all keep you company through whatever comes. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.